I woke up with the worst headache of my life, like someone was carving inside my skull. My hands touched silk sheets, which made no sense because I was just a regular office worker grinding through overtime back on Earth. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a huge, fancy bedroom with carved ceilings, velvet curtains, and a stone castle outside the window. A big sword hung on the wall, knight armor stood by the door, and a silver mirror showed me a face that wasn't mine, a pale, good-looking teenager with black hair and blue eyes. Then memories hit me like a flood. I'm now Dewin Wilson, the second son of Viscount Wilson, ruler of Blackstone City on the Odin continent. This world has real gods, priests who can sense evil spirits, and powerful mages who can examine souls. And that's my biggest problem. I'm a soul from another world, basically what they'd call a foreign demon here. If anyone finds out, it's instant soul destruction. No second chances. My family situation is complicated. My father is cold and practical. Everything is about the family status. My mother is warm, but doesn't have much say. My older brother Edmund is the perfect heir, reliable, but keeps me at arm's length since I'm just the second son. My little sister Annabelle is sweet and likes me more than our serious big brother. Tomorrow is the worst part. I just turned 15, and there's a talent detection ceremony where I put my hands on a magic crystal ball. It tests your potential for magic or combat. For a second son like me, my future options are limited. Manage some small piece of land, join the church, enlist in the army, or, if I'm incredibly lucky, become a mage. But the real terror is this. What if that crystal ball can detect that my soul doesn't belong here? It could be a death sentence. I thought about faking illness to skip it, but that would look suspicious and make things worse. I have to act normal, just a nervous teenager facing his big test. A maid knocked on my door to call me for morning prayers. I put on my best, original Dewin voice and told her I'd be right there. Then I looked in the mirror at this stranger's face and muttered a weak pep talk to myself. I pulled open the curtains and stared at the castle in the morning sun. Whatever happens, I can't avoid it. The worst that can happen is death, and maybe I'd just get sent back. So, let's do this. The family hall was set up for the talent detection ceremony. A basketball-sized crystal ball sat on a velvet table in the center, and every time I looked at it, I felt like it was grinning at me. My father sat in his high chair, cold as always, staring me down. My brother Edmund stood beside him looking supportive but tense. My mother was in the corner, nervously wringing her handkerchief. And next to the crystal ball stood Orville Hawkeye, a mid-level mage from the Regional Magic Association, the man who would judge my fate. When my father called my name, my heart nearly broke through my ribs. My palms were soaked with sweat. I kept telling myself to stay calm and act like a normal nervous teenager, because that's exactly what the original Dewin would be. I bowed stiffly and stepped forward. The mage told me to place my hand on the crystal ball and relax. My mind raced through every disaster scenario, alarms, black light, the mage screaming about purifying my illegal soul. But I had no choice. I pressed my sweaty hand onto the cold surface. Instead of disaster, the ball exploded with brilliant blue light. Pure, bright blue filled the entire hall like a flash bomb. Everyone gasped. My father's ice-cold expression cracked for the first time. Shock, then wild joy, then immediate pain as he calculated how much this would cost. My brother clenched his fist with genuine happiness. My mother covered her mouth with tears in her eyes. Even the professional mage lost his composure. He stared at the ball, muttering about my elemental sensitivity being off the charts, my spiritual power being purer and stronger than some registered junior mages, and a high-level fire element affinity. I was completely stunned. Not only did the ball not expose me as a foreign soul, it showed I had exceptional magical talent. The illegal immigrant just got a VIP pass. The mage strongly recommended I attend the Imperial Magic Academy. My brain lit up immediately. This was perfect. The capital city would be crowded with people and talents. My strange soul would be impossible to detect in that ocean of humanity. Much safer than staying here where my sharp father or some wandering priest might notice something off. Plus, I'd learn real magic to protect myself. I looked at my father with my best eager young man expression and told him the academy was my dream. He wrestled with the enormous cost, but finally nodded and agreed the family would arrange it. For the rest of the day, everything changed. Servants treated me with more respect. Dinner was the fanciest I'd ever seen. My father's glances were a few degrees warmer. My mother kept piling food on my plate. My brother congratulated me several times and mentioned the family's trade connections in the capital. I played the humble, excited teenager on the outside while my earth soul was screaming with relief inside. That night, back in my room, I couldn't sleep. Too much adrenaline, too much fear still lingering underneath the excitement. I decided to try meditating, partly to calm down, partly to start building a foundation as a future magic student. As I sank deeper into meditation, my consciousness suddenly broke through some invisible barrier and dropped into a strange dark space. A faint glow caught my attention. I carefully reached toward it with my mind. It activated like a switch. Information flooded into my brain. I had unlocked a farm space. It contained 10 acres of spirit plant farmland with time flowing twice as fast inside, 10 ranch pens with time flowing 3 times faster for raising magical beasts, and a basic workshop for grinding, processing, and storing materials. Inside the space, I could control things with just my thoughts, tilling soil, planting seeds, feeding animals, cleaning, and basic crafting. The strength of these abilities depended on my own spiritual power. My brain short-circuited for half a second when the farm space turned out to be real. Then pure excitement exploded through every nerve in my body. This was my cheat code. A farming game meets crafting workshop, with time acceleration built in. Better than any magical talent. I couldn't sleep that night. At dawn, I called my personal guard Raymond over and told him I needed experimental materials for magical research. He expected me to ask for magic crystals or rare metals. Instead, I asked for wheat seeds, radish seeds, a few baby chicks, and some rabbits. His face was priceless, pure confusion. But I threw around fancy words like life element research and elemental flow principles, and he bought it completely. He saluted and ran off to the market. Once he left, I locked myself in my room and entered the farm space again. It was exactly as I remembered, 10 acres of perfectly flat, empty land, 10 clean animal pens, and a small stone workshop at the edge. I confirmed the time acceleration. Farmland runs at double speed, and the animal pens run at triple speed compared to the outside world. I got to work tilling the soil with my mind. It was exhausting. I could only manage 2 acres before running out of mental energy. So much for plowing all 10 at once. I planted wheat in 1 acre and radishes in the other, clumsily dropping seeds into furrows and covering them with soil using telekinesis. I kept fumbling seeds everywhere like someone learning to use chopsticks for the first time. When Raymond returned with the supplies, I snatched the bag and shut the door in record time. 3 fuzzy yellow chicks and 2 gray baby rabbits, my test subjects. I pulled them into the space with a thought. The chicks went into one pen, the rabbits into another. They were scared at first, huddling together and trembling. Then came the waiting. I checked the space after 10 minutes. Nothing. After 30 minutes, still nothing. I was starting to wonder if I needed to pay for a premium subscription. But after about 1 real-world hour, everything changed. Tiny green sprouts had broken through the soil in both fields. The chicks were walking around with brighter feathers and more energy. The rabbits had gotten bolder, sniffing around for food. Time acceleration was confirmed. 1 hour outside equaled 2 hours on the farmland. The growth speed was incredible. I crouched by my little test plots watching the seedlings slowly unfurl their leaves, feeling more satisfied than any simulation game ever made me feel. This was real resources, real power. Then a memory from the original Duin hit me like lightning. The Wilson family's main business was war horses. They supplied mounts to the Northern Border Army. The horses were tough and had great endurance, but they lacked burst speed, a serious weakness against the faster orc wolf riders. My father and brother had been struggling with this problem for years, unable to afford better breeding stock. My eyes locked on the rabbits in their pen, and a wild idea caught fire in my brain. What if I got even 1 decent stallion or a few good mares and put them in the space? With triple speed time acceleration, they'd breed and grow faster. Could I improve the family's war horses through accelerated breeding? Forget planting wheat and raising chickens. That was small-time stuff. Improving the family's core military asset? That could change everything for the Wilsons. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my own blood rushing. A grand plan about horse breeding had officially taken root. I licked my dry lips and stared out the window toward Blackstone City, burning with excitement. These past few days felt like a roller coaster. First, the crystal ball nearly scared my soul out. Then I got labeled a magic genius, and before I could catch my breath, my father decided to ship me off to the Imperial Magic Academy in the capital. I looked at my enrollment letter with its fancy magic patterns and the Wilson family seal, then weighed the money bag my father, generously, gave me. The coins clinked nicely, but I knew the truth. Training a mage is insanely expensive. Tuition, materials, experiments, housing, food. This money would barely cover the basics. Being a second son meant a tight budget, genius or not. At least my father assigned Raymond as my bodyguard for the journey. The guy had no idea what he was signing up for, protecting a broke magic student who'd also need him to secretly buy animal feed. Before leaving, I did my daily farm inspection. The space had transformed in just a few days. The wheat field was covered in bright green shoots already past ankle height. The radishes were even more impressive, thick, lush leaves spreading everywhere, way healthier than anything growing outside. My 3 chicks had become plump little birds with shiny feathers, chasing each other around their pen. The 2 rabbits had turned into fat gray fur balls lounging in the corner, munching grass. I tried an experiment with the workshop, grinding up rabbit droppings into fertilizer and spreading it on a small section of wheat. After 10 minutes of staring, the effect was basically nothing. The workshop was too basic to produce anything useful. I'd need real magical fertilizer recipes or an upgrade later. Then came the goodbyes at the castle gate. My mother cried and held my hands, telling me to eat well and stay warm. I awkwardly promised I'd come back and light her candles with fireballs. She laughed through her tears and hugged me tight. My brother Edmund patted my shoulder and told me to make the family proud. Then he secretly slipped me an extra money bag, heavier than what our father gave me. He whispered that the capital was expensive and I'd need it. I nearly hugged his legs in gratitude. Edmund was a good man. That extra cash boosted my confidence enormously. Last came my father's farewell speech. He stood tall as a tower, eyes like blades, and told me I was no longer just his son. I was a representative of the Wilson name. Magic was responsibility, not for showing off. I must protect myself, protect my future companions, and protect the family honor. He warned me not to lose myself in the capital's temptations, and left the consequences of failure unspoken but perfectly clear in his cold stare. I straightened my back and declared I would study hard and never disgrace the family, throwing in a modified knight's oath for good measure. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a single satisfied nod. I climbed into our modest carriage with Raymond, and we rolled away from Blackstone Castle. I touched the extra money bag from Edmund, felt the farm space humming with life in my mind, and thought about everything ahead: tight finances, secret farming, serious magic study, and the crushing weight of family expectations. I decided to stop overthinking and close my eyes to check on my space chickens instead. The road to the capital was long, and I had crops to tend. So off I went. The Wilson family's second son, future mage and secret farmer, carrying limited gold, unlimited ambition, and a time-accelerating farm hidden in my soul. My modest carriage tagged along behind the Wilson family trade convoy, bouncing down terrible dirt roads toward the capital. The scenery changed from the barren rocky landscape of home to lush green farmland and rolling wheat fields. It was beautiful, but the roads were awful, dust clouds when dry, knee-deep mud when wet. I missed paved roads and high-speed trains. During rest stops, I played the role of an eager young magic student, reading my meditation handbook and poking at roadside plants while muttering about elemental energy. The caravan leader old John would joke about my research, and I'd make up nonsense about the life force in weeds. Raymond stayed glued to my side the whole time, guarding me like assassins might jump from the wheat fields at any moment. On the 5th day, we reached Maple Leaf Town, a busy trading hub on the route to the capital. My heart raced. This was my chance to execute the horse plan. I told Raymond I wanted to buy local maple candy as gifts for future classmates and convinced him to stay behind watching our luggage. Once out of his sight, I dropped the innocent act and followed my nose straight to the livestock market. The place was chaos. Cows, sheep, pigs, chickens all crammed together, the smell absolutely brutal. I headed straight for the horse section. I couldn't afford the fancy, expensive horses. Instead, I targeted affordable ones, an old gray war horse with a bad front leg and graying mane, and two sturdy local brown mares. Nothing special, but healthy enough to breed. Using bargaining skills from my past life, I haggled the old horse down from 5 gold coins to 3 and got the 2 mares dirt cheap. Then came the nerve-wracking part, making 3 full-sized horses disappear into my farm space without anyone seeing. I sent the horse dealer to fetch water, and the instant he turned around, I focused my mind and pulled all 3 horses into the space. They vanished without a trace. Nobody nearby noticed a thing. I shoved the gold coins at the confused dealer, mumbled something about my people already taking the horses, and bolted back to the caravan like a spooked rabbit. Raymond asked about the maple candy. I told him they were sold out. Smooth. Back in the carriage, I dove into my farm space to check on the new arrivals. The 3 horses were already in a fresh pen. The old gray horse was cautiously nibbling the space's tender grass, and something incredible was happening. His cloudy old eyes were brightening up, and his injured leg seemed less stiff already. The time acceleration and clean environment were helping him heal. The 2 brown mares adapted even faster, strolling around contentedly and munching grass, looking healthier than they had at the filthy market. I loaded up all the pens with fresh grass and gave the old gray horse extra. He was going to be my #1 stallion once he recovered. The mares just needed to eat well and grow strong for future breeding. Looking at my little kingdom, chickens scratching, rabbits hopping, horses chewing, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. My secret animal breeding operation was officially up and running. When the carriage rounded the last hill and the imperial capital came into view, I was speechless. Compared to this place, my family's Blackstone castle was a doghouse. The city walls were 3 times taller, lined with glowing magic towers. Massive gates swallowed rivers of people and carriages. In the northwest corner, enormous white crystal mage towers pierced the clouds, with visible streams of colorful elemental energy flowing along their surfaces. The air itself tasted like magic. That was the Imperial Magic Academy, my new home. Getting through the city gates was easy enough with my enrollment letter, but standing before the Academy's black obsidian gate, carved with silver runes and guarded by stone gargoyles with moving eyes, I truly felt small. Inside was another world. Green lawns, statues of famous mages, people in colorful robes hurrying everywhere, an air so thick with magic it made my hair float. Then came enrollment, and my wallet got destroyed. Tuition, 50 gold. Dorm, 30 gold for a semester. Materials kit, 10 gold. 2 robes, 5 gold. 95 gold total. I emptied both my father's money bag and Edmund's secret gift. It hurt watching every coin leave my hands. In return, I got a dull metal ID tag, 2 gray apprentice robes, a bag with cheap magic crystals, blank scrolls, 1 bottle of basic meditation potion, and a slip of paper reading, West District, Building 13, Room 404. The dorm was depressing. A plain 3-story stone building covered in ivy. The hallway smelled like dust and suspicious food. The building manager was a grumpy woman who tossed me a key without looking up. Room 404 was tiny, 4 iron beds, 1 wobbly table, for small cabinets, 1 small window. 2 roommates were already there. A golden-haired noble kid sat polishing a sapphire brooch, barely acknowledging me with a sniff. On the upper bunk, a skinny kid with bottle-thick glasses was buried in a textbook, completely oblivious to the world. I sent Raymond off to find a cheap inn and some work in the city. I simply couldn't afford to keep him nearby. Sitting on my rock-hard bed in that cramped room, I felt pretty miserable. But then night came, and I entered my farm space. Everything had transformed beautifully. The wheat field was a golden ocean of heavy, ripe grain, at least 30% more productive than normal farmland. The radishes were fat, white, and crisp, pushing halfway out of the soil. My 3 chicks had grown into magnificent full-sized chickens, strutting around proudly. The 2 baby rabbits were now plump adults with glossy fur, and one of the females looked pregnant. The horse pen was the biggest surprise. The old gray horse had been completely reborn. His mane was thick and shiny, his eyes bright and alert, his injured leg now stepping firmly. He could even trot. The 2 brown mares were sleek and well-fed, clearly ready for breeding. I harvested everything. Using my mind like a combine harvester, I swept the wheat field clean, golden grain poured into storage. I pulled up rows of plump radishes that shook off their dirt and stacked themselves neatly. I restocked all the animal pens with fresh grass and water, gave the old gray horse an extra helping and a mental mane brushing. Looking at my grain stores, my pile of radishes, my healthy animals, and my rejuvenated stallion, I felt genuinely happy for the first time since arriving in the capital. I fell asleep hugging my hard pillow, dreaming about my breeding program and the empire I'd build from this secret farm. The next morning, I sat on my rock-hard bed munching a crisp radish from my farm space, thinking about the next step. The old gray horse had basically reverse-aged in the space, muscles bulging, coat shining, stamping around his pen bursting with energy. The two brown mares were equally healthy and in their prime breeding years. The time had come. I dove into the space and played matchmaker. I led the eager old gray horse to Mare's pen. He was practically vibrating with excitement. She was startled at first, but after some mental soothing from me, I opened the gate. He shot in like lightning. What followed was not something I ever expected to witness through telepathic awareness. I kept asking myself why a magic student was watching horses breed. But it worked. The old gray strutted out looking 10 years younger. Then I brought him to Mare B. Same result. The old guy had incredible stamina thanks to the space-enhanced diet. After both sessions, I sent him back to his private pen for a well-deserved meal and mental massage. I collapsed out of the space feeling more drained than if I'd cast 100 spells. But the excitement was overwhelming. What would the foals be like? Would they inherit improved traits from the space-enhanced parents? I kept scanning the mares' bellies with my mind, hoping for signs of pregnancy. Meanwhile, classes started at the academy. The basic curriculum covered meditation techniques, elemental sensing, magic runes, and magical history. And I discovered something wonderful. My earth education gave me a huge advantage. Complex meditation pathways? I visualized them as 3D models based on anatomy diagrams I remembered. Elemental affinity theories? I reframed them as energy wave frequency matching. Magic runes? I broke them down into geometric shapes and logic circuits. Everything clicked faster for me than for my classmates. During our first practical lesson, the instructor taught basic light and breeze spells. While most students were still struggling to sense elements or drawing wobbly runes, I completed both spells on my first try. A tiny but stable white light appeared on my fingertip, and a small controlled breeze ruffled my hair. My roommates noticed. Roy Campbell, the golden-haired noble kid, failed his light spell 3 times and shot me looks of surprise mixed with jealousy. Finn, the glasses-wearing bookworm, had the best theory knowledge but fumbled badly in practice. The bald, stone-faced instructor, Mage Goodwin, stopped beside me during his patrol. He stared at my little light and the breeze spinning around my finger for 3 full seconds, gave one almost invisible nod, and walked on. That tiny acknowledgement sent ripples through the classroom. I kept a calm face while my inner self was doing a victory dance. These were just baby tricks, worthless to real mages. But standing out early helped maintain my talented student cover while I secretly ran my farm and breeding operation. The moment class ended, I hurried back to the dorm. My real priority was checking whether the mares were showing signs of pregnancy. Magic studies by day, secret horse breeding by night. I was living a double life and loving every minute of it. Days flew by in my double life. In class, I was the theory whiz. My light spell was steady as an LED, and I could aim my breeze spell precisely enough to nudge Finn's glasses without flipping his book pages. Instructor Goodwin seemed pleased. Roy kept giving me dirty looks, convinced I was secretly taking extra lessons. Finn constantly bombarded me with impossibly complex theoretical questions that I barely survived by faking answers with earth science concepts. But my real focus was always the nighttime farm inspections, specifically those 2 pregnant mares. I pampered them like a luxury midwife. Extra food, mental grooming sessions, even attempted soothing, spiritual music. Their bellies grew at an incredible pace thanks to the time acceleration. The pregnancy was progressing in a fraction of normal time. Then one exhausting night, after Finn had fried my brain with advanced rune theory, I entered the space for my routine check and heard it. A clear, lively foal's cry. Mare, A had given birth. A wet, trembling dark brown foal was struggling to stand beside her. It was noticeably bigger than a normal newborn, at least a third heavier based on my memory of family stable records. Its legs shook, but its core strength was remarkable. Within minutes, it was standing, then walking, then actually trying to bounce around. The energy was off the charts. Before I could process that excitement, Mare B's pen rang out with another cry. She delivered too, another dark brown foal, equally large-boned, bright-eyed, and bursting with vitality. Both foals had thicker skeletons, denser bones, and far more athletic instincts than any normal newborn horse. Then came the real shock. Another cry from Mare's pen. She'd had twins. This second one was completely different. Its coat was light gray with streaks of near silver in its mane. It was the biggest of the three, with longer legs, perfect proportions, and eyes that held no newborn confusion at all, just calm, sharp awareness. While the other foals had struggled to stand, this one barely tried before rising steadily to its feet. It lifted its head and surveyed the space like a born leader. It had inherited the old gray stallion's best features, amplified by the space's power. I ran frantic mental measurements on all three. Birth weight, way above normal. Bone density, significantly higher. Vitality, maximum. The silver-maned one topped every category. These weren't magical beasts that could breathe fire or anything like that. But their raw physical potential, weight, bone structure, strength, agility, and that intelligent gleam in their eyes proved they were far beyond ordinary war horses. They were the prototype of the improved battle horse I dreamed about. I showered the exhausted mothers with double rations and arranged the best post-birth care I could manage. The old gray stallion watched proudly from his pen, and I rewarded him with extra food and a deluxe mental massage. Lying on my hard bed afterward, I was grinning ear to ear. Roy's attitude, Finn's impossible questions, the crushing cost of living in the capital, none of it mattered anymore. I had land, grain, chickens, rabbits, and now 3 extraordinary foals that could change my family's future. The optimized warhorse project, Phase 1, was a complete success. Life was good lately. In class, I breezed through everything while Roy's frustrated face became my daily entertainment. Finn had basically attached himself to me as a permanent study partner, throwing impossibly hard questions at me that I barely survived with bluffed answers. But the real joy was my farm space. The 3 foals were growing at an insane rate thanks to time acceleration and premium feed. In just a few outside days, they'd shed all their newborn weakness and bulked up visibly. The 2 brown foals, A and B, had shiny coats with muscles starting to show. They were so energetic they spent all day chasing each other and kicking up hay. One of them cracked a wooden stump with a single hoof strike. I had to remove their toys before they destroyed the pen. Silver Mane, my special gray colt, was the star. His silver-streaked coat glowed like moonlight. He was the biggest, the fastest, the most graceful. He liked standing on high spots overlooking the whole ranch, and the other 2 foals seemed intimidated by him. His bone density felt close to steel. Then a letter arrived from home, written by my brother Edmund. After the usual warm greetings and our mother's tearful reminders to eat properly, Edmund got to the real news. The northern border was under constant pressure from orc raiding parties. Family war horses were being lost at an alarming rate. Worse, this year's breeding had produced barely 60% of the usual foal count, and quality was down too. The breeding stallions were underperforming and the mares had low conception rates. Our father was deeply worried. The family's military horse supply contracts and reputation were both at risk. Edmund enclosed a 50 gold coin note and told me not to worry about family business, just focus on studying. But worry? I was thrilled. This was exactly the opportunity one needed. My 3 space-bred foals were superior to anything the family stables could produce. Every measurement, weight, bone density, strength, energy, crushed normal war horse standards. The family desperately needed quality horses, and I had exactly that. I sat down and wrote a carefully crafted reply. I couldn't mention the farm space, obviously. Instead, I spun a story. I'd stumbled across a down-on-his-luck horse trader near the capital who was selling a few unusual foals cheap. Being curious about life element research at the academy, I'd bought 3 as study specimens. I'd been observing them at a farmer's place outside the city, and their growth rate and physical development were extraordinary, far beyond normal horses. I offered to send all 3 foals home to help with the shortage, framing it as both a family contribution and part of my magical research into biological optimization. I attached fake observation notes and wrapped everything in humble, eager-to-help language. Reading it back, I could already picture Edmund's confused face wondering if his little brother got scammed by a horse dealer. But once they actually saw those foals, confusion would turn into shock. I sealed the letter with a grin. Tomorrow, I'd have Raymond arrange a reliable merchant convoy to transport my 3 experimental specimens, my family's future gold mines, back to Blackstone City. Getting the foals out of my secret space and into the real world without exposing anything, that was the tricky part. I woke Raymond before dawn and told him we were going on a magical ecology field trip. He didn't question it. We snuck out of the academy, rented a covered cart, and rode to an abandoned quarry outside the city. Remote, rocky, no witnesses. I sent Raymond ahead while I pretended to commune with nature. Then I entered the space, fitted simple leather halters on all 3 foals, and pulled them out. 3 flashes of light, and suddenly 3 impressive young horses stood on the quarry stones. Silvermane announced his arrival with a proud, ringing cry. He planted his hooves on the gravel and scanned the area like a king inspecting new territory. Zero fear, pure authority. The 2 brown fillies appeared right behind him, equally healthy and alert, sniffing the air curiously. Thanks to the accelerated growth, all 3 were already the size of normal yearlings. Raymond nearly fainted. His eyes bulged, his jaw dropped, and he could barely stammer out a question about where these horses came from. I'd prepared for this. I put on my serious mage face and told him I'd used an expensive, spatial transfer scroll to move them from a secret location, where I'd bought them from a struggling horse trader. I stressed the words, top secret, and big money. Raymond, loyal as always, swallowed his shock and swore absolute secrecy. Then he actually looked at the horses closely. Growing up around knights and stables, he knew quality when he saw it. His assessment: the bone structure was thicker than the best yearlings at our family stable. The muscles already showed explosive potential, the coats gleamed with health, and the eyes burned with intelligence. Silvermane's commanding presence left him speechless. He declared these could become not just top war horses, but horse kings. We brought the foals to the Wilson family's trade office in the capital's West Market. The old manager Harold nearly had a heart attack when he saw them. He'd been running family shipments for decades and could judge a horse at a glance. Even partially covered with rough cloth, these foals radiated quality that no struggling horse trader could possibly produce. He questioned me carefully. I leaned in close and told him I'd used Mage connections to acquire them at great cost, strictly confidential family business. I handed him my letter to Edmund along with the ownership papers and told him to arrange the fastest, safest transport to Blackstone City with the best feed money could buy. When Harold lifted the cloth covering Silvermane and saw those shimmering silver strands and those sharp, calm eyes, his hands trembled with excitement. He muttered that the Wilson family's fortunes were about to change. I gave the 3 foals one last look as they stood tall in the stable yard, seemingly aware of their importance. Then I left, walking back to the academy in the fresh morning air with a still stunned Raymond trailing behind me. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The gift was sent. Now I just had to wait for the family's reaction. Back at Blackstone City, my gift arrived at the family horse farm and caused an earthquake. Old John, the veteran stable master who'd spent his entire life raising horses, took one look at the 3 foals stepping off the transport wagon and dropped his pipe on the ground. He couldn't form a sentence. In all his decades of work, he'd never seen foals with bone structure this thick, muscles this promising, or eyes this sharp. He said the silver-maned colt skeleton looked more like a magical beast than a horse. The whole stable erupted. Every groom, apprentice, and passing knight crowded around the temporary pen. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Foals with yearling-sized frames, explosive energy, and an intelligence in their eyes that no normal horse possessed. Silvermane strolled calmly through the pen like a king accepting his court's admiration, his silver strands catching the sunlight. When a groom accidentally knocked over an iron bucket with a loud crash, Silvermane barely flicked an ear. The two fillies startled for half a second, then instantly calmed, scanning for the source of the noise. No panicked bolting, no wild eyes, the kind of battlefield nerves you'd want in a veteran war horse, already showing up in foals. Edmund burst into my father's study, practically dragging the old man to the stables. My father had been hunched over military requisition papers, stressed about war horse shortages and tight finances. He didn't expect much from his second son's surprise, but when he saw Silvermane, everything changed. My father had spent half his life on battlefields. He knew exactly what made a great war horse: strength, speed, endurance, courage, and spirit. He saw all of it in that colt. He said Silvermane's eyes reminded him of his own beloved war horse, Blackstone, who'd died in combat. Maybe even stronger. When he opened the pen gate and gestured, Silvermane burst into a sprint, a gray flash tearing through the enclosure with fluid, explosive power, turning on a dime. The speed and agility were beyond anything a foal that age should possess, beyond even many adult war horses. My father said, "Good," 3 times in a row, his iron composure cracking with unmistakable excitement. His hands actually trembled when he reached for his pipe. He read my letter about stumbling across a struggling horse trader and buying them with pocket money. Then he looked at Edmund and asked with a rare half-smile, "Do you believe that?" Edmund laughed and shook his head. They both knew these foals were impossible to find on any open market. My father didn't care how I really got them. He immediately issued orders. Classify all 3 foals as the family's highest-level secret assets, codenamed Silver Radiance, Brownstone 1, and Brownstone 2. Assign the most trusted, elite grooms with round-the-clock shifts. Double the feeding rations beyond even the old Viscount's personal warhorse standards. Triple the stable security. Anyone unauthorized within 10 steps would be treated as a traitor. And then the best part, right back to doing. Tell him the horses arrived, and the family is very satisfied. Tell him to keep studying and that the family will fully support his research. Whatever resources he needs, just ask. My father emphasized that word, research, with the weight of a man who'd just discovered his second son might be the family's most valuable asset. Things at the academy were going great. I was breezing through the new water flow spell, while Roy fell further behind. My farm space was thriving, second-generation chickens and rabbits, another harvest of wheat and radishes, and the old gray stallion looking younger than ever. But what I really couldn't stop thinking about was how my family reacted to those 3 foals. Then the dorm manager pounded on my door with an urgent family package. I nearly crushed a radish in my farm space from the shock. I ripped open the heavy, wax-sealed bundle. 2 letters inside, one from my father, one from Edmund. My father's letter hit me like a thunderbolt. The man who never showed emotion called my foals the greatest surprise in the family's recent horse breeding history. He described Silvermane, now codenamed Silver Radiance, as having legendary bone structure. Spirit beyond any foal the veteran stable master had seen in 3 generations of service. Old John had apparently been sleeping next to Silver Radiance's feed trough, calling it the peak of his career. The whole city was buzzing about the Wilson family's dragon blood foals. But then came the sharp edge. My father wanted to know exactly where these horses came from. My vague story about a struggling horse trader clearly didn't convince him. He demanded full details, warning me that treasures attract danger and that hiding information about something this important was unacceptable. Edmund's letter was pure warmth. He described the chaos at the stables, Knights going crazy over Silver Radiance's speed, my father nearly crushing his pipe, old John treating the foals like sacred relics. My father had even drunk an extra bowl of soup at dinner, which apparently counted as wild celebration for him. Then Edmund dropped the real gift, a 200 gold coin banknote tucked inside the envelope. He told me to spend freely, eat well, buy whatever materials I needed, and just ask if I wanted more. He also offered to send additional guards or a manager to help me in the capital. And of course, he wanted to know my real source, gently hinting about hidden beast-taming masters or secret summoning magic. Holding 250 gold coins total, Edmund's gift plus my father's enclosed 50, I felt my status in the family shift completely. I wasn't the forgettable second son anymore. I was the one who solved the family's biggest problem. Now I had to handle my father's questions. I wrote him back with a carefully crafted story about a mysterious old hermit outside the capital who practiced life-nurturing arts and raised horses in a hidden place rich with magical energy. The old man sold me the foals, taught me a few feeding tips, then vanished saying, "Our fated encounter has ended. Impossible to verify, impossible to disprove." I included a simplified version of my space grass feeding method to make it believable. To Edmund, I wrote something warmer and looser, thanking him for the money, joking about finally affording meat, and teasing that my secret source was reliable and might produce more treasures in the future. I sealed both letters and sat back, feeling the weight of that bank note against my chest. My position had transformed. My ice-cold father used the word surprise. My practical brother was throwing gold at me. The family's core business problem, warhorse quality, now had a solution, and I was the one who provided it. With this fresh capital, it was time to upgrade. Better seeds, magical beast cubs, expanded operations. My secret farm was about to level up. I sat on my creaky bed, fingering the 200 gold coin note Edmund sent me, and for the first time I felt dissatisfied with my farm space. Not because it wasn't working, it was working beautifully. Golden wheat, fat radishes, healthy livestock, the old gray horse looking better than ever. The problem was that all of it was worth almost nothing. Selling a cartload of premium radishes in the capital would earn me pocket change. Using a time-accelerating magical space to grow ordinary vegetables was like driving a race car to deliver newspapers. Completely wasted potential. The warhorse experiment proved what real value looked like. 3 foals cracked my father's iron composure and made my brother shower me with gold. Why? Because they solved a critical problem. They hit the family's biggest pain point. That's when it clicked. I needed to grow magical plants, not radishes. Take something basic like hemostasis grass, common and cheap. But what if space-optimized versions had double the healing power? Mercenaries and armies would fight over it. Or concentration flowers, currently worth 1 gold each. If I could boost their effect by 30% with fewer side effects, every magic student and junior mage would want them. And higher-tier magical plants, ingredients for fire enhancement potions, longevity elixirs, breakthrough medicines. Those were strategic resources that even powerful mages and great nobles would pay fortunes for. Accelerated growth plus optimization could turn my farm into a magical plant factory. Stronger effects, shorter cycles, higher yields, better quality. And if I learned alchemy on top of that, the profits would multiply exponentially. Growing radishes while sitting on this gold mine. That was begging with a golden bowl. Then I thought harder about my position. Inheriting a title was impossible. My father was healthy as a castle wall, and Edmund's position as heir was rock solid. Staying under the family's wing meant being a glorified servant with a fancy title, constantly watched, unable to explain where my magical plants came from without the lies getting more and more ridiculous. The academy was safer, but too restrictive. Everything was expensive, eyes were everywhere, and there was no room for large-scale operations. The capital was just a stepping stone. My real goal crystallized: build enough power to claim my own territory in the north someday. Become an independent lord, not a dependent second son. I mapped out my plan. First, master alchemy. That was the key skill. Push hard in Instructor Goodwin's classes and squeeze every drop of knowledge from Finn the Bookworm. Second, learn combat and survival magic. Fireballs, shields, speed spells. Third, use every gold coin and connection to acquire magical plant seeds. Hemostasis grass, concentration flowers, fire tinder grass, ice crystal moss. Anything I could find through academy channels or the capital's black market. Fill all 10 acres with magical crops. Fourth, build a team. Raymond was loyal but limited. I needed capable people, struggling warriors, herbalist commoners, rejected alchemy apprentices. Fifth, start collecting low-level magical beast cubs and magic cores through the mercenary guild. Raise them in my space ranch, stockpile cores, and eventually build an enhanced personal guard. Sixth, maintain the family pipeline. Keep writing letters to my father and Edmund, reporting academic progress, and hinting at research interests in magical plants for northern logistics improvement. Keep the promising young scholar image alive. Never let Edmund's gold supply dry up. When the time was right, money sufficient, team reliable, magical plant stockpile overflowing, skills sharp. I'd break free. Apply for a Northern Development Charter, claim my own land, and build my own power base. I'd step into the open as a talented alchemist, trading enhanced healing potions and concentration elixirs on equal terms with the family and even the royal military. No more made-up stories about mysterious hermits. Just undeniable value. I wrote Edmund back, filling my letter with enthusiastic talk about researching magical plant cultivation for harsh environments and basic potion brewing. I casually mentioned that magical materials were painfully expensive in the capital and asked if he could send some common hemostasis grass and concentration flower seeds from the south. Every word painted me as a devoted son thinking about the family's future. I tucked the bank note against my chest and looked out at the glowing Mage towers. Radishes were finished. The next chapter was magical plants, gold, allies, and eventually, freedom. The second son's chains would break. It was just a matter of time. I hit the academy library like a man on a mission, dragging Raymond behind me as a human bookshelf. I grabbed every book on basic alchemy and magical plants I could find, potion recipes, plant cultivation guides, ingredient lists. I wasn't interested in theory. I wanted formulas and shopping lists. The numbers were beautiful. A low-level meditation potion cost about 2 gold coins in materials, but sold for 5 to 10. Healing salves, energy drinks, all had fat profit margins. The key ingredients were common magical plants, concentration flowers, hemostasis grass, awakening mint, moonlight grass. Exactly the kind of things my space could supercharge. I headed to the Academy's materials shop first. One look at the prices and I walked right out. 1 gold coin for a mediocre concentration flower seedling was highway robbery. Instead, I dragged Raymond to the West Market Black Street, a grimy maze of shady vendors selling everything from fake antiques to stolen magical items. Most of what the vendors had was garbage. Dried-out seeds, wilting plants, worthless leaves. But in a quiet corner, I found a silent merchant with decent stock, living hemostasis grass, budding concentration flowers, and fresh awakening mint, all with noticeably stronger life energy than the rest. I haggled hard and bought 3 bunches of hemostasis grass, 3 concentration flowers, 2 mint plants, and a packet of moonlight grass seeds. My wallet shrank painfully, but the investment was worth it. Back in my space, I planted everything carefully. The results were immediate and thrilling. Under double speed acceleration, the wilting hemostasis grass perked up with deep green leaves and stronger energy. The concentration flower buds slowly opened, silver patterns glowing on their petals, releasing a calming aura several times more potent than before. The mint unfurled bright green leaves radiating a refreshing coolness. Moonlight grass seeds sprouted within hours, their tiny leaves already showing faint silver specks. Space optimization worked on magical plants. Confirmed. Next step, actually making potions. I rented a tiny alchemy lab at the academy, basically a closet with a crude cauldron, some glass tubes, and a heating circle. 5 silver coins per hour, materials not included. My first attempt at healing salve exploded. The mixture turned dark green, bubbled violently, and sprayed burnt sludge all over my face. Raymond peeked and looking genuinely worried I was brewing poison. Second try, an energy drink. I lost control of the temperature, and the whole thing dissolved into foul-smelling black goop. More money wasted. Third attempt, meditation potion. This time I focused everything I had, controlling temperature precisely with my mind, following the recipe to the letter. Slowly, the murky liquid turned clear, then shifted to a pale blue, releasing a clean, calming scent with tiny silver sparkles floating inside. It worked. I took the potion to a shady dealer on the black market who bought, questionable origin, magical goods. He tested it, looked mildly surprised, and said the energy was unusually pure, stronger than typical apprentice-made stuff. We settled on 6 gold coins. My cost had been about 2. Nearly 4 gold profit on 1 bottle. With those warm coins in my pocket, I went straight to the live creature market near the Mercenary Guild. The smell was brutal, but I found what I wanted. 2 steel-tooth rabbit cubs and 1 earth-shell lizard cub, the cheapest, tamest magical beasts available. 3.5 gold coins total. I brought them into my space and released them into empty pens, where they immediately started sniffing around the fresh grass. Lying on my hard bed that night, exhausted but satisfied, I took stock. Magical plants planted and already thriving in the space. First potion successfully brewed and sold at a profit. First magical beast cubs acquired and housed. My alchemy failure rate was embarrassing, but the proof of concept was solid. The assembly line was running. Grow magical plants, brew potions, sell potions, buy more seeds and beast cubs, repeat. Each cycle would get more efficient and more profitable. The farming mage's empire had officially begun. My magical plants had gone absolutely wild in the space. The hemostasis grass grew thick, tough leaves with edges sharp enough to cut, radiating intense medicinal energy. The concentration flowers bloomed with glowing silver patterns, releasing a calming aura so powerful it instantly cleared my study fatigue better than any commercial potion. The moonlight grass developed tiny silver specks on its leaves at night, pure lunar energy, definitely above normal levels. And the awakening mint grew fat, juicy leaves with a refreshing kick so strong that just mentally sniffing it felt like getting jabbed with ice needles. My space warehouse was bursting with premium magical plants. The old radishes and wheat sat sadly in the corner, completely outclassed. I was ready to make serious money. Overflowing with confidence, I marched into the Academy's public alchemy lab, paid my 5 silver coins, and got to work. First attempt, healing salve. I melted the beeswax perfectly. Then I crushed my premium hemostasis grass and dripped the juice in. The cauldron went berserk. The liquid turned from clear to ink black, swelled up like a volcano, blew the lid clean off, and sprayed a glob of scorching green sludge directly onto my face. The leftover goop looked like sewer waste. Putting that on a wound would probably cause infection, not healing. Second attempt, energy drink. I carefully heated water, added the root ingredient at the right temperature, then gently dropped in a leaf of my amazing awakening mint. The water instantly exploded into a muddy brown foam that smelled like expired candy mixed with dirt. Drinking it wouldn't wake anyone up, it would mentally scar them. Raymond poked his head in hopefully and asked if the smell being slightly less awful meant I'd succeeded. I snapped back that I was doing reverse material testing, very advanced stuff. He left looking confused, staring at the wreckage of 2 failed batches and the wasted premium ingredients. My harvest-fueled confidence deflated completely. Having world-class ingredients meant nothing if the chef was terrible. I had the best magical plants in the city and the worst alchemy skills in the academy. The painful truth hit me hard. Space farming was only half the equation. Without proper alchemy technique, I was just turning gold into garbage. I needed to study alchemy seriously, library sessions, instructor guidance, practice until my hands stopped producing disasters. I glared at the burnt residue on my cauldron and made a vow. I would master this craft if it killed me. Top materials plus top skills. That was the only formula that worked. I dragged myself back to the dorm feeling like a wrung-out rag. My wallet was empty, my pride was shattered, and the memory of those 2 spectacular alchemy failures haunted me. Having god-tier ingredients but trash-tier skills was like owning a gourmet kitchen and only knowing how to burn instant noodles. But I refused to quit. I grabbed every alchemy book I could find, swiping several right off Finn's desk, so fast his glasses nearly flew off. He stared at my back as I stormed out, probably wondering what broke me. I buried myself in the library's alchemy section for hours. The theory was brutal: element compatibility charts, energy transformation models, stability thresholds. Harder than any math I'd studied on Earth. But I forced myself through it, translating everything into terms I could understand. Slowly, my failures started making sense. The first explosion happened because my premium hemostasis grass was too powerful for cheap beeswax to contain, and I didn't cool things down in time. The second disaster was caused by mixing energetically incompatible ingredients without properly activating the weaker one first. In both cases, I'd been treating alchemy like dumping ingredients in a pot and hoping for the best. The books taught me that a mage's spiritual power needed to work like a precision instrument inside the cauldron, constantly sensing energy changes and making micro-adjustments. My spiritual power had been more like a stick poking a fire blindly. That night, instead of sleeping, I entered my farm space to train. I sat cross-legged among the magical plants, surrounded by element-rich air far denser than anything outside. With the space running at double time speed, every real-world hour gave me 2 hours of uninterrupted meditation in a perfect environment. I dove deep into meditation. My spiritual power grew like a dry sponge, soaking up water. All those confusing textbook concepts started clicking into place. I could actually feel the individual elements flowing and dancing around me in the space's concentrated atmosphere. Then it happened. My spiritual power hit a tipping point. Something burst open inside my mind like a dam breaking. A silent explosion of clarity and power flooded through me. Everything in the space became sharper, more vivid. I could see the tiny veins on plant leaves, hear the faint hum of elemental energy. My mental control became dramatically more precise. I'd broken through to junior mage level. Back in my physical body, I tested immediately. My light spell produced a bright, stable glow several times stronger than before, lasting effortlessly for 10 minutes. My breeze spell moved with pinpoint accuracy. I could ruffle specific pages on Finn's desk without disturbing anything else. Most importantly, my mental, stirring rod for alchemy had transformed from a crude stick into a precision tool. When I mentally simulated the brewing process, I could sense the energy states of imaginary ingredients with a sensitivity I'd never had before. I could feel where to apply heat, where to cool, where to guide and blend. The alchemy disasters were about to end. I could feel it. I was ready to go back to that cauldron and show it who was boss. Breaking through to junior mage level changed everything, especially my alchemy. I went back to that same cramped lab booth, and it was like being a completely different person. Healing salve? Smooth as butter. My spiritual power could now sense exactly when the hemostasis grass energy was about to overwhelm the beeswax, and I'd cool it down at precisely the right moment. Out came a deep green paste with a clean medicinal scent, 100 times better than my earlier disasters. Energy drinks? Even easier. I balanced the mint's sharp coolness against the vitality root's sluggish energy, like a master bartender mixing cocktails. Clear, pale green, refreshingly potent. My success rate climbed above 60%, and explosions became a thing of the past. I took my growing stockpile to old lame Jack on the black market. He tasted my products, raised an eyebrow, and admitted the quality was noticeably above standard apprentice work. We haggled, 7 gold for healing salve, 6.5 for energy drinks. Since my space-grown ingredients cost almost nothing, every sale was nearly pure profit. My money bag was getting fat again. But money alone wasn't enough. I couldn't build a northern territory by myself. I needed people, loyal, capable people who'd work for me. Then an idea struck. I'd cheated my way to junior mage using the space's accelerated training environment and enhanced potions. What about kids labeled as inferior talent, ones the academy and nobles considered worthless? If I could find children with even a trace of elemental sensitivity, I could use my space and potions to develop them into useful magic-capable workers. Nature affinity kids could accelerate crop growth. Earth affinity ones could help with construction. Perfect for building a frontier settlement. I took Raymond to the slave market in the outer city's Black Iron Fence district. The place was a nightmare. Filthy streets, rusting cages stuffed with desperate people, the crack of whips, and the stench of hopelessness everywhere. I won't pretend it didn't sicken me. But I wasn't there to be a saint. I was there to find diamonds in the garbage. I went to a larger slave merchant called the Skull and Coin Society, which had the resources to do basic magical aptitude testing on their stock. I quietly extended my spiritual power, scanning the caged children one by one. Most showed nothing. Dead silence, zero elemental resonance. But after exhausting, draining work, I found 5. 3 boys, 2 girls, ages 10 to 15. All ragged, starving, eyes either blank or feral. But their spiritual signatures were unmistakable. 3 with nature element sensitivity and 2 with earth element sensitivity. Faint as candle flames in a windstorm, but real. The gold-toothed merchant wanted 100 gold coins. I talked him down to 65 through aggressive bargaining. He thought I was a fool, who buys inferior talent slaves. They're only good for scrubbing alchemy lab floors. He had no idea what I could do with them. I signed the binding magical contracts, collected my 5 trembling new charges, and left that hellhole with Raymond guarding them closely. Looking at those scared, Skinny kids huddled together like baby quails. I didn't see waste. I saw my future construction crew, my farming team, my foundation for everything I planned to build in the north. Leading 5 terrified kids out of that slave market felt like carrying fragile cargo that could shatter at any moment. I brought them to a small rented house I'd prepared in a quiet alley in the academy's outer district, a plain place called Oak House. Nothing fancy, but it had a courtyard, a well, clean walls, and most importantly, privacy and safety. The kids huddled at the door, staring at the clean floor and intact roof like they couldn't believe it was real. No cages, no whips. First thing I did was throw out their slave numbers. Grass 7, grass 8, dirt 5, those labels were dead. I walked down the line and gave each one a real name. The stubborn-eyed boy became Carl. The sharp-looking one, Amir. The stocky boy, Bard. The timid girl, Leah. The smallest girl, Ella. I told them this was their new beginning. They'd learn, they'd grow, and once they mastered what I taught them, they could become retainers of the Wilson family. Not slaves, but people with standing. The word, freedom, hit them like a slap. Carl unconsciously touched the brand on his wrist. They couldn't quite believe it. But talk means nothing to starving children. I had Raymond cook up a real meal, sizzling smoked meat with stewed radishes and cabbage from my farm space. When the smell filled Oak House, their stomachs roared in unison. They hadn't seen real meat in who knows how long. When the steaming bowls reached their hands, they shook so hard the soup nearly spilled. Little Ella forgot her fear entirely, just pressing her nose toward the food. They ate with their heads down, tears mixing quietly with the hot broth. Warm stomachs first. That's how you start thawing frozen hearts. After the meal, I sat them around the big table. Before any magic training, they needed basics, reading. I handed Raymond chalk slates and charcoal pencils and appointed him their literacy teacher. His face collapsed. Fighting bandits? Easy. Teaching letters? Torture. But he grabbed the slate, took a deep breath, and bellowed at maximum volume. This word is person. 1 stroke left, 1 stroke right. Standing tall. That's a person. You are all people. Understand. The kids nearly jumped out of their skin. Why yes, louder. Did you not just eat? Yes. Say it. Person. Person, they screamed back, faces red. It was rough, but effective. That word and Raymond's roar. You are people, not livestock, burned itself into their memory. As evening fell and oil lamps cast warm light across the room, the children lay on the floor practicing their first written word over and over with charcoal, faces scrunched with concentration. Little Leah pressed so hard her cheeks flushed red. Then I guided them through a basic meditation exercise, just breathing, relaxing, feeling the warmth of the lamp and the breeze outside. They settled down without resistance this time. I gently extended my spiritual power around them, letting the natural vitality from my farm space seep into the room like an invisible warm blanket. Oak House was quiet. 5 broken children were learning their first word and taking their first step toward a future none of them had dared to imagine. And I was watching the foundation of my future team slowly take shape. Mornings at Oak House started with Raymond's bellowing literacy lessons. The kids were learning fast. They'd snap to attention the moment they saw a slateboard. Little Leah was the most driven, ever since a faint green glow flickered on her fingertip during meditation. That tiny spark became her entire motivation. But I knew I couldn't handle both money-making and magic teaching. I needed help. Roy was out of the question, too arrogant. But Finn, my bookworm roommate, was perfect. Encyclopedic knowledge, just terrible at practical magic himself. I slapped him on the shoulder and offered a deal. Tutor my kids in basic magic theory in exchange for a steady supply of my enhanced meditation potions. He stared at the glowing blue bottle in his hands, wrestled with himself for about 3 seconds, then agreed. Professional instruction for the kids, and I'd be free to focus on business. Whether Finn would freak out discovering they had inferior talent, I'd deal with that later. With the kids handled, I dove into my farm space to check the livestock. The steel-tooth rabbits had been busy. In just 1 outside month, 3 months in the accelerated pens, the female had produced a whole litter of fuzzy babies with oversized white teeth, already growing at ridiculous speed. The earth-shell lizard, meanwhile, was still lounging in its sand pit doing absolutely nothing productive. I poked its shell with my mind. It opened one eye, then went back to sleep. Looking at the fully grown male rabbit, I had an idea. I'd been eating radishes and smoked meat for weeks. Why not try magical beast meat? I pulled the rabbit into the processing workshop. The workshop's tools activated, skinning, separating organs, slicing the meat into clean cuts. The flesh had visible earth element energy running through its grain. My mouth watered just looking at it. Then came the real shock. After processing, the workshop's core glowed and spat out a tiny crystal, irregular, warm yellow-brown, with fine crystalline patterns on its surface. A magic core. My heart nearly stopped. According to what I'd read in the library, steel-tooth rabbits are the lowest-tier earth element magical beasts, and only about 1 in 10 adults ever develops a core. Yet this rabbit, barely past maturity, had produced one. Even a basic first-tier core was worth several gold coins on the market, and it was a key ingredient in many magical potions and items. Was I just lucky? Or did my space somehow boost magic core production rates? I had to find out. I rushed back to the creature market and bought 5 more steel-tooth rabbits, 2 males, 3 females, for 5 gold coins. I pulled them straight into the space and set them up in separate pens alongside the existing rabbit family. Staring at my growing rabbit army, I held that warm little core between my fingers and felt its gentle earth energy pulse. If the space could reliably produce magic cores from cheap, fast-breeding rabbits, that changed everything. It meant a constant stream of gold and a guaranteed supply of crafting materials for my future alchemy work. I smiled at my rabbits like a proud grandfather. Eat well, grow fast, and make lots of babies. The farm space kept revealing new surprises, and each one made my plans bigger. 3 months flew by. At Oak House, the kids were making real progress. Leah could hold a stable green glow on her fingertip for about 3 breaths. Tiny, but historic for someone with inferior talent. Bard could make the stone beneath him rumble faintly. Carl and Amir were slower, but burning with determination. Finn, fueled by my premium meditation potions, had somehow shaped these supposed rejects into something resembling magic apprentices. Meanwhile, my space ranch had exploded. The steel-tooth rabbits bred like absolute machines under triple speed acceleration. In 3 months of real time, 9 months inside the pens, they'd filled 2 enclosures of 50 slots each. Wall-to-wall fluffy, steel-toothed rabbits chomping grass like popcorn. Managing them with my mind was exhausting, like running a military barracks. But the payoff was staggering. In the corner of my space warehouse sat a small mountain of magic cores. Warm, yellow-brown crystals the size of fingernails, each pulsing with pure earth element energy. After butchering dozens of adult rabbits across different batches, I confirmed the impossible. Every single rabbit raised to maturity in my space produced a magic core. 100% rate. In the outside world, 1 in 10 was considered miraculous. I had hundreds of cores worth thousands of gold coins. But I couldn't sell them. Dumping that many at once would raise every red flag imaginable. I tore through library books searching for ways to use large quantities of cores, but most applications only needed tiny amounts. Weapon enchantments, lamp magic, basic body strengthening potions, all consumed barely a handful. My mountain wasn't getting any smaller. Then my roommate Roy accidentally handed me the answer. He overheard me grumbling about magic cores and started showing off his noble knowledge, mocking low-level cores as useless junk. But then he mentioned something that made my ears perk up. He had a family recipe gathering dust, considered worthless by his prestigious clan. A bloodline potion. It used magic cores as its primary ingredient, combined with specific magical plants, to forcibly awaken combat energy in ordinary people, turning complete nobodies into apprentice-level knights instantly. The catch? Whatever tier of core you used locked the person's power ceiling permanently. A first-tier core meant they'd never surpass apprentice knight level. Roy's family considered this trash. Why waste resources creating capped fighters when you could train real knights? But in my head, fireworks were going off. Roy didn't know about my space. He didn't know I had unlimited free magic cores. The math was beautiful. Normal knight training took years of expensive preparation with uncertain results. This potion could mass-produce basic fighters instantly, at almost zero cost to me. In the north, where I planned to build my territory, I wouldn't need elite warriors. I needed numbers, soldiers who could wear heavy armor, wield real weapons, and fight orc raiding parties. Hey, capped, apprentice knight was still worth 10 ordinary militia, and I could make hundreds of them. I played it cool, acting disappointed about the level cap. Roy offered to trade the garbage recipe for my improved meditation potion formula. He thought he was fleecing me. I pretended to agonize over the deal, then reluctantly agreed. He tossed me a yellowed old scroll like it was trash. I handed over a modified potion recipe. Good, but not my best version. Roy went back to combing his golden hair, smugly humming to himself. I clutched that scroll like it was the key to a kingdom. Looking at my mountain of magic cores, I no longer saw a storage problem. I saw an army. Oak House was finally bearing fruit. While my space ranch kept churning out magic cores, that yellow mountain growing bigger every day, my real focus was on the 5 kids. Months of Finn's theory lessons, Raymond's shouting literacy classes, and the subtle influence of my space's life energy had finally cracked through their inferior talent ceiling. The breakthrough came during one of Finn's lectures. Leah was sitting in her usual corner, absently touching a crack in the stone floor. Suddenly Finn went silent. In that crack, a few dead, shriveled weed seeds trembled. Then a tiny green sprout pushed through the hard soil. It lasted barely a second before wilting as Leah's spiritual power ran out, but everyone saw it. Amir's eyes nearly popped out. Carl's voice shook. Finn couldn't explain how someone with inferior talent had just performed natural revival magic. Leah stared at her fingertip, then burst into tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she actually had power. Days later, Bard had his moment. I pointed him at a pile of rubble and told him to imagine the stones as clay in his hands. He turned red as a tomato, veins bulging, and shouted, "Rise!" A fist-sized rock wobbled into the air, hovering crookedly for 3 seconds before crashing down and nearly crushing his toes. Ugly, brief, but real, the earth element had answered him. These breakthroughs meant all 5 kids had officially crossed into magic apprentice territory. Glacially slow by academy standards, but for my purposes, perfect. Meanwhile, my library habits were drawing unwanted attention. I'd become a permanent fixture in the nature magic and earth magic sections, grabbing books like How to Boost Crop Yields with Natural Magic and 12 Basic Rune Patterns for Reinforcing Walls, Practical Farming and Construction Guides. Exactly what my kids needed, but completely bizarre for a fire affinity magic prodigy. Instructor Goodwin noticed. He appeared behind me one day like a ghost, his sandpaper voice asking why I was so interested in applied techniques instead of proper combat magic. I fumbled out an excuse about wanting to help people grow more food and build stronger houses. He looked at me like I'd insulted the entire magical profession, then walked away without another word. But his stare stuck to my back like glue. He also spotted me in the alchemy lab, where I was burning through magic cores practicing the bloodline potion recipe. My technique was improving steadily, though occasional puffs of yellow smoke and weird crystallization sounds still escaped my booth. Goodwin watched through the door crack, a fire talent genius ignoring attack spells to study farming, construction, and strange core-based potions. It clearly baffled him. Then a few days later, he made his move. I was reaching for another farming manual in the library when a thick, gold-embossed book landed on the table in front of me. Fundamentals of Elemental Life Alchemy, written by Goodwin himself. He told me that reading tricks without understanding principles would never make me a real mage. This book might answer the questions I was struggling with in my core potion experiments. Then he placed a bronze badge carved with complex runes on top of the book, a pass to the restricted 3rd floor, Plants and Life, section of the library. Resources not available to ordinary students. He told me not to waste my talent, then vanished into the bookshelves like a phantom. I stood there holding his personal textbook and a restricted access pass, heart pounding. The stern old instructor who'd been watching me with suspicion had just handed me exactly the knowledge I needed to level up my alchemy and magical plant research. Oak House's sprouts were growing, and somehow I'd caught the attention of one of the academy's biggest fish, and instead of getting caught, I'd been thrown a better fishing rod. Oak House's courtyard got a complete makeover. Raymond hacked the weedy corners into neat test plots, and my apprentices officially started their practical training, farming, and construction magic. I lined up the nature affinity kids in front of the garden beds. Leah would practice plant growth acceleration, Carl would work on life force sensing, and Amir would assist while learning control. I handed out ordinary radish and cabbage seeds, no space-grown premium stuff for practice. Leah buried her seeds carefully, pressed her palms to the soil, and gently channeled her spiritual power downward, trying to coax the seeds awake. Carl crouched at another bed, extending invisible feelers into the ground to detect the health of buried seeds. Amir, predictably, slammed both hands down and shouted, "Grow!" His spiritual power hit those seeds like an earthquake. Most of them flipped upside down or split open. Dead. I yelled at him for turning seeds into pancakes while he scratched his head sheepishly. After a frustrating first round, I had an idea. My enhanced meditation potions were too strong for apprentices, but diluted heavily with water. I mixed a barrel of barely tinted, magical nutrient water and made everyone drink a bowl. Leah felt the mental fog lift. Carl's sensing sharpened slightly. Even Amir's wild energy became slightly more manageable. By the end of the session, Leah's radish seeds had pushed out 2 tiny yellow leaves, weak and wobbly, but alive. Carl's cabbage seeds slowly poked through the surface. Amir's sole surviving seed produced a crooked, traumatized-looking sprout that seemed to be protesting its owner's violence. Progress was progress. Meanwhile, I put the Earth Affinity duo to work. Bard got a pile of wet clay and instructions to shape proper building bricks using his elemental connection. The kid loved playing with mud, and his natural feel for earth elements made the clay surprisingly cooperative. He produced a lopsided but recognizable rectangular brick. Future Mason confirmed. Ella had the harder job, trying to reinforce ordinary stones by pushing earth energy into their structure. But stone resisted her weak power completely. She nearly cried from frustration. I told her to be patient and feel for the gaps inside the rock. Bard came over to help, pressing his hand against a stone and describing what he sensed. It's packed tight inside. No room to push anything in. Crude analysis, but more insight than Ella had managed alone. Then I upgraded their mission. Instead of just playing with rocks and clay at the table, I told them to use their earth-sensing abilities to survey the ground around Oak House. Find loose stone deposits for building material. Find quality clay layers for brickmaking. Bard threw himself flat on the ground, jammed his hands into the dirt, and started listening to the earth like a veteran prospector. Within minutes, he was pointing and shouting. Loose gravel layer to the east, extra sticky clay deposit to the southwest. Raymond grabbed a pickaxe and confirmed both finds. The eastern dig revealed usable crushed stone for foundations and paths. The southwestern clay sample was far stickier and better quality than ordinary mud. I slapped Bard on the back so hard he stumbled. The kid beamed with pride. Ella smiled through her dried tears, finally feeling useful too. Standing in the middle of my little courtyard, crooked sprouts in the garden beds, raw stone and good clay piled in the corners, sweaty apprentices grinning with accomplishment. I felt like a proper foreman surveying a construction site. Crooked seedlings were still seedlings. Gravel was still building material. Sticky clay could still make walls. My farming mage squad and construction crew were coming together, one messy step at a time. The northern frontier had no idea what was heading its way. While my apprentices practiced their farming and construction magic at Oak House, I snuck back to the Academy's alchemy lab with Roy's, trash, recipe, and a handful of space-grown magic cores. The bloodline potion, my ticket to building a northern army. The recipe looked straightforward. Ground magic core powder as the main ingredient, hemostasis grass powder, orchid flower petals, moonlight grass, and pure water. But the instructions literally said, walk on thin ice, for the difficulty level. First attempt. I ground the core into fine powder, dumped everything in, and lit the heating array. The magic core's earth energy exploded like a waking beast the instant it hit water. When I added the hemostasis grass, its life energy clashed violently with the earth energy. The cauldron lid blew off, spraying yellow-brown toxic smoke everywhere. I choked and coughed while staring at a pot of swamp sludge. One precious core, wasted. Second attempt. I adjusted the order, adding orchid petals first to calm the earth energy before introducing the hemostasis grass. It worked initially, but then the orchid's cool energy actually provoked the hemostasis grass. The liquid turned the color of rotten blood, and a sweet, toxic fog rose up, that made me dizzy and nauseous. The remains solidified into a sinister dark red crystal. Another core gone. Third attempt. I added moonlight grass as a stabilizer. It actually held things together. No explosions, no toxic gas. I started the final fusion step, feeling victory was close. Then I relaxed my focus for a fraction of a second. The liquid instantly seized up and hardened into a solid brown lump like cheap ore. Third core dead. 3 failures, 3 wasted cores. But at least I understood the pattern now. Balance and timing were everything. Fourth attempt. I treated every step like defusing a bomb. Lowest possible heat. Orchid petals and first as a gentle buffer. Moonlight grass for stabilization. Then the hemostasis grass, not poured in, but sprinkled grain by grain, wrapped in spiritual power, dissolving slowly into the energy mixture. No explosion, no smoke, no solidifying. The liquid gradually turned into a thick, muddy dark red substance that smelled like dirt and rust. Disgusting to look at, but the energy inside was chaotic yet powerfully active. I'd done it. Maybe. I wasn't about to drink it myself. I borrowed a lab mouse from the facility manager, put it in an iron cage, and dripped the tiniest amount into its water dish. The mouse sniffed, sneezed at the smell, then licked it. 2 seconds later, it screamed. Its fur stood on end, its eyes glowed red, and it launched itself at the iron bars with terrifying strength and speed, easily double its normal power. The cage rattled and shook from the tiny creature's assault. But after less than a minute, the mouse collapsed. Muscles went limp, breathing turned ragged. It lay exhausted at the bottom of the cage, still twitching with residual aggression, too tired to even eat its favorite grain. I stared at the ugly red sludge in my bottle, then at the spent, irritable mouse. The bloodline potion worked. It absolutely, undeniably worked. The power boost was real and dramatic. But the side effects were brutal, total exhaustion and lingering aggression. The recipe needed serious refinement. Better control, smoother energy fusion, reduced side effects. But the proof of concept was confirmed. Space-grown magic cores could fuel this potion, and the potion could supercharge a living body. I tucked the bottle against my chest like a ticking bomb and looked at my ever-growing mountain of magic cores. The path to my Northern Night Army had just gotten a lot more real. In the basement of Oak House, under a flickering oil lamp, I faced old Jack, a veteran Wilson family guard with a scarred face and graying hair. Years ago, he'd earned the nickname, Broken Blade Jack, for cutting down 3 bandits with a chipped sword. But a bad injury had left him stuck just below apprentice knight level for decades, reduced to guarding doors. I pulled out my crystal bottle of bloodline potion, that thick, muddy, dark red sludge that smelled like rust and swamp dirt. I told him the truth straight. This potion might push him past his barrier and give him real combat energy. But it could also kill him. My animal tests showed dramatic power boosts, but also violent episodes and dangerous exhaustion. I couldn't guarantee his safety. Raymond jumped in with passionate encouragement, reminding Jack of his old glory days and his loyalty to the family. Jack's hands trembled as he stared at the bottle. The basement went silent for a long time. Then Jack's cloudy eyes lit up with fierce determination. He said his life belonged to the Wilson family anyway. Better to gamble than rot away as a doorman. He grabbed the bottle, ripped out the stopper, and downed every drop without hesitation. The taste nearly made him vomit, like swallowing rust-flavored mud. He forced it down. Then his body exploded with pain. He screamed like a wild animal, curling up as his veins bulged across his skin. His muscles swelled visibly, straining his old leather armor. Yellowish energy, raw, uncontrolled earth element combat aura, leaked from every pore. His bones cracked and groaned under the strain. I was drenched in cold sweat, my spiritual power locked onto his body, watching for the worst. Raymond wanted to rush forward, but I shouted him back. For a terrible moment, I thought Jack was going to burst apart. Then he roared, not in pain, but in defiance. Decades of frustration and failure poured out in that sound. His back straightened. The wild energy slowly, painfully pulled back inside his body. A clear, stable combat aura began rising from deep within him like a sunrise after an endless night. His eyes snapped open, sharp and fierce as a young lion's. He clenched his fist, and a solid yellow glow wrapped around it. Real combat energy. Not the faint trace he'd struggled with for years, but genuine apprentice knight aura, the kind that enhances strength and can be channeled through weapons. Raymond shouted with joy. I exhaled so hard my whole body sagged. Jack stared at his glowing fist and started laughing and crying at the same time. Broken Blade Jack is back. He choked out between sobs and laughter like a man reborn. He tried to kneel before me in gratitude, but the moment he moved, the side effects hit. His face went white. The combat energy turned chaotic inside him. His muscles seized up, and crushing exhaustion slammed him flat. He could barely lift a finger. But even lying on the cold floor, pale and soaked in sweat, he was grinning. He said the pain was nothing. He was a knight now. That was all that mattered. I told him to rest and stabilize his energy. The side effects were severe, and he'd need time to recover. Most importantly, absolute secrecy. Nobody could know about this until I'd refined the formula. When the time came, I'd report everything to my father and brother, and Jack's contribution would be fully recognized. He nodded weakly but firmly. He'd carry the secret to his grave if needed. Looking at Jack, broken but beaming on the basement floor, and Raymond buzzing with excitement beside him, I felt a wave of accomplishment wash over me. The bloodline potion worked on a real person. Crude, painful, with brutal side effects, but it genuinely created a knight. My eyes drifted upward, past the crumbling ceiling, toward the cold northern frontier I couldn't yet see. The path to my army had just been proven real. While old Jack lay in the basement recovering from his potion, grinning through the pain like a madman, I knew the bloodline potion needed serious work before mass production. The side effects were too brutal, the process too wasteful. I dragged Raymond to the capital's grand market to hunt for magical plant seeds and inspiration. I haggled my way through dozens of stalls, stuffing my bags with fire tinder grass, ice crystal moss, awakening mint, and whatever else looked useful. Good haul, but nothing that would solve the potion problem. Then, passing a junk stall in a forgotten corner, my farm space brand suddenly went crazy, pulsing and vibrating like it was starving. I traced the reaction to a dusty silver necklace with a grimy gray stone pendant. It looked like a worthless river pebble. I played it cool, bargained the sleepy old vendor down to 8 silver coins, and walked away clutching what my space was screaming was treasure. Back at Oak House, I locked the door and pulled the necklace into my space. The moment the stone entered, my brain nearly exploded. The space brand erupted with blinding light, and an ancient, overwhelming presence filled everything, vast, wise, impossibly old. The gray crust fell away, revealing a crystalline object with millions of tiny runes flowing inside it. A wave of pure mental clarity washed through the space. Information flooded my mind. This was a divine fragment, a piece of the god of wisdom's godhood. How it ended up on a junk stall, I had no idea. My luck was absolutely insane. Before I could process it, the fragment dissolved into the space itself. Everything upgraded instantly. The farmland's time acceleration jumped from double speed to 5 times speed. The animal pens went from triple to 10 times speed. Magical element density in the air skyrocketed. The soil turned richer and darker. The biggest change was the old stone workshop. It rebuilt itself into a gleaming white temple, the beginner wisdom workshop. Its core ability, using accumulated faith energy to analyze and optimize potion recipes, magical techniques, and even cultivation paths. I immediately fed it the bloodline potion recipe and all my data, Jack's painful transformation, the mouse experiments, every failure. The workshop's walls lit up with flowing runes as it tore the formula apart and reassembled it. Seconds later, a new scroll appeared, glowing faintly gold. An optimized bloodline potion recipe, complete formulas for levels 1 through 3. In theory, someone who took all 3 tiers could reach full junior knight level. Side effects dramatically reduced, stability vastly improved. I brewed the new version. After the usual round of trial explosions, I finally produced a bottle of deep ruby red liquid, clear as honey, smelling like fresh herbs and clean earth. No rust stink, no swamp flavor. A completely different product. I brought it straight to Raymond. He eyed the pretty bottle suspiciously, remembering Jack's agonizing experience. But I told him this was his chance. I had the full set of potions ready to push him to junior knight level. He looked at Jack, who nodded encouragingly, then threw his head back and drank. Instead of screaming and convulsing, Raymond felt a warm wave spread through his body like sinking into a hot spring. His muscles swelled, combat aura flickered to life, and power settled into him smoothly and steadily. 2 minutes later, he stood up and punched the air experimentally, generating a solid whoosh of force. He blinked in confusion. That's it. I feel like I could do a workout right now. The side effects were barely a mild soreness, nothing compared to Jack's hours of agony. I looked at Raymond bouncing around testing his new strength, then at the beautiful ruby potion in my hand, and laughed out loud. The improved recipe worked perfectly, and with the complete 3-tier formula, I now had the blueprint to mass-produce real knights. The northern frontier just got a lot closer. 2 more family letters arrived, and both carried the same message wrapped in different packaging. We need more from you. My father's letter started unusually warm. Silver Radiance and the other foals were thriving beyond all expectations. Old John the stable master actually cried, calling Silver Radiance a future horse king of the North. The family's military horse contracts were secured, and the northern governor's office had sent commendations. My father used words like magnificent beyond compare to describe the horses. Coming from a man whose face could freeze water, that was practically a love poem. Then came the heavy part. The northern border situation was deteriorating fast. Orc raids were increasing in both frequency and ferocity. A new shaman had appeared among the tribes, using sinister magic. Warhorse losses were climbing sharply. One exceptional colt couldn't turn the tide alone. The family stables were breeding as fast as possible, but good stallions were scarce and foals took time to mature. My father's closing was pure him, diplomatic but transparent. He suggested that if I happened to stumble across any more special sources or could produce any other pleasant surprises, the family would be deeply grateful. He also enclosed some cold-resistant magical plant seeds from the north for my research. Translation: keep the miracles coming, son. Edmund's letter was warmer, but carried its own weight. He opened with another fat banknote, 300 gold coins this time. My brother's generosity was honestly moving. But then he revealed trouble on the southern front too. The family's growing success had attracted jealous neighbors. The nearby Viscount Glenn and Baron Horton were making problems, harassing trade caravans, stirring up border communities, even staging small armed standoffs. Edmund suspected someone powerful was backing them. Everything had been contained so far, but the family desperately lacked a core military force strong enough to truly intimidate these rivals. His closing matched our father's tone. Keep studying, keep producing results, and if more research breakthroughs, like Silver Radiance, happen to appear, that would be wonderful. I sat with both letters, the 300 gold note, and the bags of northern plant seeds, putting the pieces together. The north needed horses and soldiers who could survive orc attacks. The south needed muscle to scare off ambitious neighbors. Both problems pointed to the same solution sitting right under my feet. My space ranch was producing magic cores at an absurd rate. The mountain kept growing. The Wisdom Workshop had already optimized my bloodline potion into a clean, effective formula with minimal side effects. Old Jack was proof the original worked. Raymond was proof the improved version worked beautifully. I had complete recipes for 3 tiers of potion, enough to push ordinary people all the way to junior knight level. The North didn't need elite warriors. It needed large numbers of armored fighters who could hold a line against orc raiders. The South didn't need legendary knights. It needed enough loyal, capable soldiers to make the neighbors think twice. Mass-produced knights were exactly what both situations called for, and I was now the only person in the world who could make that happen. I looked at the magic core mountain in my space, the optimized potion formula in my workshop, and the letters from my father and brother asking for miracles. Time to deliver. The moment the Academy's holiday bell rang, I was already packed. I left Oak House in Finn's care, grabbed Old Jack and Raymond, and raced back to Blackstone City. This time I wasn't carrying horses. I was carrying something that could reshape the entire family's future. The castle's council room was heavy with tension when I arrived. My father sat stone-faced with the latest intelligence reports spread before him. A horse transport convoy had been ambushed by elite orc raiders, losing over a dozen war horses and all their guards. The horse shortage was becoming critical. Edmund sat beside him looking equally grim. The southern neighbors were getting bolder with their provocations, and the family had no military force strong enough to shut them down properly. Into this storm, I walked in with my two companions. Edmund noticed old Jack immediately. The man who'd been a shadow of himself for years now stood tall with sharp, fierce eyes, looking a decade younger. I cut straight to the point. I told them I had something that could solve the family's military weakness, a potion I called the bloodline elixir. It could give any healthy, ordinary person real combat aura, turning them into apprentice knights regardless of natural talent. Edmund shot to his feet shouting, "Impossible!" My father's eyes blazed like drawn swords. I pointed at Jack. He stepped forward, clenched his fist, and summoned a steady, glowing yellow combat aura, unmistakable earth element knight energy. Real, stable, undeniable. The room went silent. My father, sharp as always, immediately demanded to know the price. I laid it out honestly. First, anyone who takes it gets their potential permanently locked at apprentice level unless they receive a higher tier version, and I currently only had the formula up to junior knight level. Second, the process carried physical risks and temporary side effects. Third, each dose required a first-tier magic core as its primary ingredient, with higher tiers needing higher-grade cores. Edmund's excitement cooled as he processed the limitations, but my father's eyes only grew brighter. Locked at apprentice level? So what? He said, his voice like rolling thunder. The North didn't need prodigies who took decades to train. It needed soldiers who could form up quickly, wear heavy armor, and hold a battle line against orcs. The South didn't need legendary champions. It needed enough armed fighters to make jealous neighbors think twice. Numbers and reliability mattered more than individual brilliance. He asked if I could mass-produce it. I told him yes. My success rate was already above 40% with sufficient core supply. He slammed his palm on the oak table. Orders flew. Edmund was to secretly select 100 young men from loyal family guards and local families, strong, disciplined, and absolutely trustworthy. They'd be offered the chance to become knights in exchange for lifetime service. Any betrayal would be dealt with by family law. Then I pushed for the critical second piece. Combat aura without proper breathing techniques was like having a sword with no edge. I requested permission to teach these new knights the family's prized, Blackstone Rampart technique, a defensive earth element breathing method that would maximize their strengths as heavy infantry. My father's eyes narrowed. That technique was a core family secret, normally reserved for direct heirs or those who'd earned extraordinary merit. He reminded me of its weight. I stood my ground. These men would never advance beyond their locked level, so giving them the best defensive technique possible would transform a group of capped apprentice knights into something far more terrifying. 100 heavy armored soldiers channeling connected combat aura in tight formation, an immovable wall that could make even mid-level knights hesitate. They wouldn't just be soldiers. They'd be the family's living fortress. Its rampart. My father repeated the word slowly. The family's rampart. I could see the vision forming behind his eyes. 100 ironclad warriors standing before Blackstone City like a mountain, breaking orc charges and intimidating southern rivals alike. He approved everything. The breathing technique, the potion program, full access to family resources. Edmund would support me completely. Before I left the room, my father looked at me for a long time with an expression I'd never seen before: pride, wonder, and something deeper. He said quietly that each surprise I brought was bigger than the last, and he hoped this, Rampart Knight core, would truly become the family's foundation. Walking out of that council room, I felt the weight of what I'd just set in motion. 100 knights. A family transformed. And this was only the beginning. Back in the capital, I turned Oak House's basement into a potion factory. My father had given me full access to family resources plus 2,000 gold coins for materials. The actual cost was under 500. I pocketed the difference without a shred of guilt. I became a human assembly line, grinding cores, mixing ingredients, controlling temperatures, bottling potions. Day after day, nothing but dry bread, sleep, and staring into that black cauldron. With the Wisdom Workshop's optimized recipe, my success rate held above 60%. There were still occasional explosions and toxic fumes, but one by one, beautiful ruby-red bottles of bloodline potion filled the wooden crate in the corner. 100 bottles for the family's new night core, order complete. During breaks, I checked my space ranch and got a massive surprise. The original 5 steel-tooth rabbits, the ones I'd bought months ago, had evolved. Under 10 times speed acceleration and the dense magical atmosphere from the divine fragment upgrade, they'd grown larger than any of the younger generations. Their teeth gleamed like metal, chomping through ironwood fencing like crackers. Their energy signatures read as third-tier magical beasts, peak elementary level. Normal steel-tooth rabbits max out at first tier. Reaching second tier is considered a freak mutation. Mine hit third. The space wasn't just accelerating growth, it was pushing creatures past their species limits. It just took long-term exposure. Third-tier magic cores were far more powerful and pure than first-tier ones. This meant my future supply of mid-grade and high-grade potion ingredients was guaranteed. No more buying overpriced cores on the market. My rabbits were literally producing them for free. After finishing the family order, I took care of my own interests. I had Raymond recruit 3 trustworthy fighters from the family's trade guards. Old Six, a quiet man with deadly knife skills. Hans the Bull, strong enough to carry a horse. And Kale, Hawkeye, a sharp-eyed descendant of hunters. All had families back in Blackstone City, loyalty insurance. 3 potions, 3 transformations in Oak House's basement. Familiar groans, familiar bursts of combat aura, familiar brief exhaustion. 3 new apprentice knights. Combined with Jack and Raymond, I now had 5 personal knights sworn to me alone. They knelt before me in that cramped basement, eyes blazing with gratitude and devotion. I named Jack as captain, Raymond as deputy, and gave them their standing orders. Recover fully, master the Blackstone Rampart breathing technique, and prepare for future upgrades to higher-tier potions. With the family mission done and my private guard established, I turned to growth. Using Instructor Goodwin's bronze badge, I raided the library's restricted 3rd floor, scanning every advanced text I could find. Mid-level alchemy charts, magical beast bloodline analyses, energy breakthrough theories, soul contract techniques. I didn't understand half of it, but I stored everything. The Wisdom Workshop would process it all eventually. I also went shopping for higher-grade magical beast cubs across the capital's markets and black market auctions. Fire foxes, snow ferrets, windrunner foal cubs, anything with potential went into my space ranch. I even gambled 100 gold coins on a mysterious petrified lizard egg from the Misty Mountains at a black market auction. Pure speculation, but with my space's power, even long shots were worth taking. Looking at my expanding menagerie of fuzzy, scaly, and feathery babies in the space pens, I smiled like a proud zookeeper. Every one of them would eventually produce magic cores, the fuel for my potion empire and my growing army. On the surface, academy life looked normal. Classes, meditation, lab work. But underneath, everything was accelerating. Beasts growing, knowledge stockpiling, knights training, and plans for the north taking sharper shape every day. I slipped into my farm space for a full inspection tour, and the sight nearly overwhelmed me. Everything was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. The 10 acres of farmland, now running at 5 times speed, were bursting with life. The eastern 5 acres were my core production zone, the backbone of my potion empire. Thick, powerful hemostasis grass grew like a small forest, leaves sharp-edged and reeking of potent medicine. Concentration flowers swayed with silver-patterned petals, radiating calm energy perfect for stabilizing wild magic core reactions. Moonlight grass carpeted the ground in green velvet, sprouting tiny silver sparkles at nightfall. And my trusty space radishes stood fat and white in neat rows, essential for neutralizing potion volatility and feeding my people. The western 5 acres were my experimental garden. Northern thorn vines from my father's seed package were stubbornly spreading their thorny branches. Black market fire tinder grass glowed faintly red at the leaf edges. Ice crystal moss spread across cold stone slabs, trailing wisps of frost. Awakening mint had gone wild, growing thick, juicy leaves that could wake the dead. I planted everything I could get my hands on. Even if I didn't need it now, my future self might. The ranch area was an absolute zoo under 10 times acceleration. 2 pens housed the steel-tooth rabbit empire. The 5 original rabbits had grown into bull-sized monsters with metal-sheen teeth, that chewed through reinforced fencing like cookies, confirmed third-tier peak magical beasts. They were my premium core producers. Dozens of younger rabbits filled the neighboring pen, contributing steady first and second-tier cores. But just as valuable was their waste. I processed their magically enriched droppings into superb fertilizer that made every plant in the space grow faster and stronger. The rabbits ate grass, produced cores, and fertilized my fields. A perfect closed loop. 6 earth shell lizards lounged in their sand pit, their armor-like shells growing harder by the day. I was eyeing those shells for future night armor crafting. The biggest female lizard was reluctantly sitting on my 100 gold coin gamble, the petrified lizard egg from the black market auction. I bribed her with premium rabbit meat feed to keep warming it. Every day I scanned that egg hopefully. In the southeast pen, 3 space-optimized war horses lived alongside 2 young Windrunner foal cubs I'd recently purchased. The Windrunners were still small, but already showed remarkable speed with faint wind element energy trailing their hooves. My plan was simple. Let them grow up together, bond naturally, and eventually breed. If I could combine warhorse endurance with Windrunner speed, the offspring would be extraordinary. The southern pens held my newest additions. 6 firefox cubs huddled together in a warm ball of red fur, occasionally sneezing out tiny flames and playfully swatting at each other's sparks. Next door, 2 palm-sized snow ferret cubs chased each other at blinding speed, leaving thin frost trails on the ground wherever they ran. For pens still sat empty, waiting. I had plans for those: fire lions, ice wolves, wind eagles, whatever I could acquire. Every beast meant future magic cores, future potion ingredients, future power. Standing in the center of my kingdom, surrounded by flourishing magical crops, multiplying beasts, and the quiet hum of accelerated time, I felt a deep sense of control and satisfaction. Resources were cycling perfectly. Rabbits fed the soil, soil grew the plants, plants made the potions, potions built the army. Then, as my mind swept casually past the lizard pen, I caught something from that gray stone egg, the faintest pulse, barely there, like a tiny heartbeat. I froze. Was it actually starting to hatch? 2 years had passed since I first arrived at the academy, and everything had transformed beyond recognition. Oak House was no longer a shabby hideout. Raymond's crew had rebuilt it with stone additions, and the courtyard was practically a small compound. Leah's vegetables grew taller than people, and Bard and Ella's earth magic walls were thick enough to be fortress ramparts. I'd pushed myself to peak mid-level mage, 1 step from high level. When I opened my palm, a fist-sized fireball appeared instantly, stable and scorching hot, warping the air around it. A far cry from that bean-sized flicker 2 years ago. My farming mage squad had all crossed into junior mage territory. 10 nature and earth affinity apprentices who'd been labeled worthless by every standard measurement, now capable of accelerating plant growth, sensing soil conditions, reinforcing structures, and basic healing. Terrible fighters, but unbeatable as a frontier development team. And then there was my Knight Corps. Raymond and Old Jack had advanced to peak junior knight level. Behind them stood 30 warriors in formation, all junior knights, all trained in the Blackstone Rampart technique. When they lined up and linked their combat auras, they formed a wall of golden earth element energy that radiated terrifying pressure. Every one of them owed their power to me and knew it. Their loyalty was absolute. I had everything I needed: a magical support team for farming and construction, a combat force for defense and offense, a space farm producing unlimited supplies, and potions that could create more knights on demand. Then the news hit like a thunderbolt. The king had issued a Northern Frontier Development Decree. The royal proclamation was posted across the capital. Any noble, knight, or free citizen could claim land in the northern wastes, build settlements, farm the wilderness, and fight orcs. Kill points would be awarded for every enemy slain. 1 point per orc warrior, 10 per orc knight equivalent, 100 per orc commander, double for shamans and chieftains. These points could be exchanged for title promotions, combat potions, breathing techniques, magical weapons, armor, land, and more. The capital erupted. Ambitious nobles, desperate knights, and opportunistic commoners all started making plans. When I read the announcement, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with pure excitement. This decree was custom-made for me. What did I lack? Territory. Official standing. A legitimate reason to build my own power base. What did the decree offer? Land. Titles. A legal framework for killing orcs and earning rewards. What did I have? A space farm producing infinite supplies. Bloodline potions to mass-produce knights. A mage team for infrastructure. A knight corps for combat. And a menagerie of growing magical beasts as future assets. I slammed my fist on the table. Northern Black Stone Wasteland. That's our target. I gathered my core team. Raymond and Jack didn't hesitate. They'd been waiting for this. Leah's face flushed red with excitement, promising her squad could handle all the farming and construction. Finn pushed up his glasses nervously, mentioning orcs, but I cut him off. Danger meant opportunity. Orcs weren't threats. They were walking warpoint dispensers. The plan was clear. Move fast, secure a foothold, build a settlement, farm the land, kill orcs, stack points, and earn a lordship. First step. Go home to Blackstone City and convince my father and brother to back us with people, money, and supplies. Standing in the Oak House courtyard, surrounded by my loyal knights and eager mages, feeling the pulse of my thriving space farm in the back of my mind, I let the words roll through my head for the first time. Lord Dewan Wilson of the Northern Territory. It had a nice ring to it. I sat on my rock-hard bed studying a beaten-up map of the northern frontier, tracing my finger along the coastline until it landed on a spot labeled Black Reef Coast. Someone had doodled a skull next to it. Every other noble considered this place worthless. Black rocky shores that wrecked ships, salt-poisoned soil that barely grew weeds, and nothing worth fighting over. Perfect. Other people saw wasteland. I saw opportunity nobody would compete for. My space farm could turn dirt into paradise. Leah's nature mages could speed grow crops in a third of normal time. Salt-damaged soil meant nothing when I had magical fertilizer that could make rocks sprout vegetables. The remote location kept us away from the main orc attack routes. The winding coastline had natural small harbors, perfect for a future dock connecting to the family's southern trade network. Cheap, safe, hidden, and full of potential. My ideal starting point. But I needed my father and brother to fund it. No more vague stories about mysterious hermits. I needed a real business pitch. I prepared physical evidence. From my space, I pulled a sample of rich black soil radiating life energy and packed it in a crystal vial. I plucked a fat, gleaming space-grown radish with its roots still attached. Then I grabbed a handful of pathetic salt-crusted dirt from a wasteland outside the city and stuck a half-dead weed in it. Side by side, the contrast was devastating. Dying scrub versus a radish that looked ready for a bodybuilding competition. For the economic angle, I brewed several bottles of my best healing salves and energy potions using space-enhanced ingredients. These weren't student-grade products anymore. They approached professional quality. Proof that my future settlement could serve as a premium potion supply base for northern garrisons and wealthy lords. I wrote a detailed proposal letter. First, I sold Black Reef's advantages. Remote and safe from heavy orc raids, natural harbor potential, no competition for the land, dirt cheap to claim. Then I unveiled my trump cards. Special fertilizer that transforms barren soil into farmland, accelerated crop varieties that mature in half the normal time, nature mages for agricultural support, and a coastal position perfect for quiet trade connections. For resource requests, I kept it reasonable to avoid scaring them off. 50 guards, 30 skilled craftsmen, 500 farming households, 3 months of food supplies for 1,000 people, seeds, weapons, tools, some coastal trading vessels, and 500 gold coins. I emphasized that this was a one-time startup cost. Once running, the settlement would be completely self-sustaining and eventually profitable for the whole family. At the very end, I dropped my biggest bait almost casually. I mentioned having made progress in understanding Silver Radiance's bloodline and hinted that I might be able to produce even better horses in the future. The space ranch already had Silver Radiance's offspring growing up under accelerated conditions. I was telling my father and brother that backing this settlement meant not just one miracle, but a pipeline of miracles. I packed everything carefully. Letter, soil samples, the radish versus weed demonstration, and the premium potions, and handed the bundle to old Jack with instructions to deliver it personally to Blackstone City. As I watched him leave carrying my business proposal, I stared at that skull-decorated map and grinned. Black Reef Coast, Wilson Territory. It had a very nice ring to it. Old Jack delivered my package to Blackstone Castle, and from what he told me afterward, the presentation went exactly as I'd planned, maybe even better. My father and Edmund sat in the council hall as Jack unwrapped everything piece by piece. First, the crystal vials of space soil. When the caps came off, even my stone-cold father's fingers twitched from the raw life energy pouring out. Edmund inhaled deeply and said it cleared his head instantly. Then the two plant pots. One held a dried-up weed in cracked, salt-white soil, authentic Black Reef Coast dirt. The other held that same worthless soil, but with a fat, gleaming radish bursting with health, leaves spreading wide and roots about to crack the pot. The visual contrast was brutal. Edmund jumped out of his chair to examine it, barely believing what he was seeing. Jack confirmed he'd personally dug the soil from the coast and watched me grow that radish using my special fertilizer. No tricks, no illusions. Then the potions. My premium healing salve and energy drinks sparkled in their bottles. To prove the healing salve worked, Jack, without warning anyone, pulled his knife and sliced open his own arm right there in the council room. Edmund winced. My father's eyes sharpened. Jack calmly dabbed a pea-sized amount of salve on the wound. The bleeding stopped almost instantly. Within 10 breaths, the cut was visibly closing and scabbing. Edmund blurted out that this quality of medicine could double battlefield survival rates. His merchant brain was already calculating profits. Finally, they read my proposal. My father's face stayed frozen through the opening sales pitch about Black Reef's advantages. But when the plan reached the course sections, magical. Fertilizer transforming barren land, accelerated crops achieving self-sufficiency in 3 months, establishing a potion production base and magical beast ranch. His expression shifted from cold skepticism to genuine shock. And then my closing hook. Black Reef would provide a perfect, secure environment for continuing Silver Radiance's bloodline optimization research. That hit exactly where I aimed. Silver Radiance was my father's pride. The idea of a hidden sanctuary purpose-built for breeding the next generation of super horses. That was an offer he couldn't refuse. The room went silent. My father sat motionless for what must have felt like forever. Edmund was running numbers in his head. Potion profits, magic core revenue, trade route expansion. Then my father spoke. He approved everything. 50 elite guards, 30 skilled craftsmen, 500 farming households, 3 ships loaded with 3 months of food, seeds, weapons, and tools, all top quality. 500 gold coins from Edmund's accounts. And then the real shock. He assigned 3 of the family's best armed merchant vessels, the Bedrock, the Black Eagle, and the South Wind, complete with experienced crews, all under my direct command. Those were the family's prized ships, capable of ocean voyages and fighting off pirates. Edmund's jaw nearly hit the table. Even he hadn't expected that level of commitment. My father's final message through Jack was classic him, half praise, half death threat. He called Black Reef the family's nail driven into the north, a future granary, money vault, and strategic blade. The family would support me fully. The opportunity was given. But if I failed, he told Jack to remind me of the imperial law regarding nobles who lose frontier territories and waste family resources. He wouldn't send anyone to collect my body. The sea monsters could have it. Old Jack came galloping back to Oak House like a man possessed, horse hooves spraying mud everywhere. He practically fell off his saddle and charged into the yard screaming, "It's done. All of it." I was crouching in the courtyard trying to stop baby steel-tooth rabbits from chewing my boots. When I heard his voice, my heart nearly stopped. He ripped open his jacket to show the wound he'd made during his demonstration, already scabbed over beautifully thanks to my healing salve. Then he rattled off the list. 50 guards, 30 craftsmen, 500 farming families, mountains of food and seeds, weapons and tools all top quality, 500 gold coins, and, the part where his voice cracked, 3 armed merchant ships. The Bedrock, the Black Eagle, and the South Wind. The family's best vessels, crews included, all under my command. I leaped off the ground like a startled cat and howled so loud I scared every bird within 100 meters. 3 ships, the ones with crossbow cannons that could handle open ocean. I grabbed Jack's shoulders and shook him until he confirmed it twice. Then I forced myself to calm down. Timeline, half a month. Everything would be assembled at Blackstone City's port, ready to load the moment my fleet arrived. No time to waste. I jumped onto a wooden stump in the yard and bellowed for everyone to come out. Raymond charged out first with his greatsword. Leah stumbled out half asleep with bird's nest hair. Bard emerged covered in stone dust. Ella had powder in her braids. Then came the apprentice mages rubbing their eyes, followed by my 30 knights forming up in the yard. I announced the news, full family backing for a northern frontier expedition. Target, Black Reef coast. I painted the picture big. Yes, it was a barren salt flat right now, but we had magical fertilizer, optimized seeds, nature mages to speed grow crops, earth mages to build structures, and knights to handle threats. We'd turned that wasteland into a granary, a potion workshop, and a beast ranch. The yard erupted. Knights pounded their chest armor. Leah and the nature mages blushed with excitement. Bard cracked his knuckles ready to build. Then I snapped everyone into action. Pack everything. Strip oak house bare. Every useful item was coming with us. I dove into my personal inventory first. Space radishes, mountains of them, got carefully loaded into lined baskets. Optimized seeds of every type went into labeled waterproof bags. Living magical plant seedlings were dug up with their soil and placed in wooden boxes, entrusted to Leah's careful hands. My alchemy equipment was disassembled and packed. The Wisdom Workshop's knowledge scrolls got triple wrapped in oilcloth and stuffed against my chest, more valuable than gold. Mid-packing, Leah screamed. A rogue rabbit cub had escaped and was happily munching on one of my precious hemostasis grass seedlings. I grabbed a broom and chased it around the yard until Raymond snatched it by the scruff. I ordered every rabbit locked in cages immediately. They were coming as breeding stock and emergency food. Then I assigned roles. Jack and the 30 knights would be our combat force, clearing land, chopping trees, fighting orcs, and helping with heavy labor. Leah and the nature mages owned our food supply, making the magical fertilizer work and growing crops fast. Bard, Ella, and the earth mage apprentices would handle all construction, buildings, roads, ditches, walls, everything our settlement needed to physically exist. Finn was staying behind at the academy. I told him honestly that forcing a bookworm onto a frontier construction site was wasting talent. He'd serve better as our technical advisor in the capital, researching what we needed and joining us once we were established. Relief flooded his face, and he promised to keep studying in directions that would help us. Looking at my chaotic, excited, mismatched crew, knights stacking crates, mages wrapping seedlings, rabbits squealing in cages, everyone buzzing with purpose, I stood on my wooden stump and made it official. Half a month. Blackstone City Port. We sail north to Black Reef coast. Half a month flew by, and Blackstone City's port turned into organized chaos. 3 ships flying the Wilson family's Black Eagle. Banner, the Bedrock, the Black Eagle, and the South Wind sat heavy in the water like armored beasts, loaded to their limits and straining against their mooring ropes. The docks were a madhouse. 500 farming families with everything they owned, bundled bedrolls, dented iron pots, bags of hometown soil for good luck. Men carried their most valuable possessions on their backs. Women clutched babies and overstuffed packs, faces showing equal parts fear and hope. Kids either cried or stared wide-eyed at the enormous wooden ships. 50 family guards worked themselves hoarse trying to keep order, herding confused farmers away from wandering livestock and pointing lost families toward the right gangplanks. One woman tripped over a rope and spilled her basket, clothes and a handmade rag doll tumbling into the mud. A bearded guard yelled at her to hurry, then quietly bent down and stuffed everything back in for her. The 30 craftsmen were far more efficient. Old Grim the carpenter hauled his precious chisels and saws aboard, barking at helpers to be gentle. Blacksmith apprentices sweated under a portable anvil and bellows. Stonemasons carried their measuring tools with steady hands, already wondering what kind of rock the new land would offer. My 30 knights stood in sharp contrast to all the chaos, silent, armored, weapons ready, forming a protective corridor on the Bedrock's deck. Jack and Raymond at the front, eyes scanning everything with predatory calm. Leah crept up the gangplank, clutching her box of hemostasis grass seedlings so tight her knuckles went white. Bard gawked at the towering masts and muttered that rigging looked harder than moving rocks. My little band of mage apprentices looked hilariously out of place among the weathered sailors and ironclad knights. Below decks, crews worked frantically. Grain sacks went into the driest holds. 3 months of food for over 1,000 people. Seed bags were sealed under oilcloth in special compartments. Farm tools, carpentry equipment, and blacksmith gear were sorted and lashed down. My precious space-grown radish seeds and sample radishes got locked in a storage room next to the captain's cabin with 2 knights standing guard. They watched those crates harder than a bank vault. Building timber, stone blocks, and prefab lumber for temporary shelters were stacked and roped across the Black Eagle's decks. The South Wind's livestock area was pure pandemonium. Pigs screaming, sheep bleating, chickens exploding from their bamboo cages in clouds of feathers and noise. My magical beast cubs sat comparatively quiet in reinforced cages on the bedrock, though one steel-toothed rabbit started gnawing on its iron bars and nearly triggered a guard into drawing his sword. The whole port smelled like feed, animal waste, sea salt, and human sweat. I stood at the bow of the bedrock in a fitted travel outfit and a windproof short cloak, hair whipping in the breeze. Edmund fought through the crowd to the ship's side. He looked up at me with that complicated expression, pride, worry, and the pain of watching a fortune sail away. His farewell was pure Edmund. These ships are borrowed. Remember to return them. Don't feed them to sea monsters. And make something of yourself out there. I grinned and shouted back that I'd bring him Black Reef souvenirs. He shook his head with that familiar mix of annoyance and brotherly affection, then disappeared into the crowd. Loading finished. The commands rang out one after another. Raise anchor. Cast off. Unfurl sails. Heavy iron anchors ground free from the harbor mud. Thick ropes snaked back aboard. Massive brown canvas sails climbed the masts and snapped open like eagle wings, catching the wind with a deep, powerful boom. The ships groaned, shifted, and began to move. Slowly at first, then with growing momentum, the 3 vessels pulled away from the dock in a line. The familiar sounds of the port faded. Blackstone City's outline shrank behind us. Everyone on deck turned to look back. Farmers gripping the rails, guards at their posts, knights standing watch, apprentice mages peering over shoulders. Children stopped crying and stared at the endless ocean. Wives silently squeezed their husbands' rough hands. I stayed at the very front of the bedrock, facing forward. Ahead lay autumn cold fronts, treacherous reef-lined waters, and a barren coastline hidden in gray mist. Either my exile or my kingdom. The ship's horns sounded, deep, powerful, carrying far across the water. I threw my arm forward and shouted over the wind and waves, loud enough to carry to the ships behind us. Destination, Black Reef Coast. Set sail. The sails swelled tight as drawn bows. The bedrock and its companions carved through the deep blue sea, trailing long white wakes like arrows fired toward the cold, unknown, and endlessly promising north. We carried chickens, livestock, grain, steel, space-grown radishes, and 1,000 anxious but hopeful hearts. The Northern Province Governor's office sat in the center of Ice Rock City like a pile of frozen granite blocks glued together with frost magic. Stone gargoyles flanked the entrance, staring at visitors like they were sizing up a meal. The plaza outside was absolute madness. Every type of frontier hopeful had shown up. Broke nobles in dented ancestral armor bragging about their grandfathers' battles. Shirtless mercenary captains recruiting thugs at the top of their lungs. Pale-faced, low-level mages dreaming of free land and magic towers. And crowds of common families clutching their belongings with a mixture of land hunger and orc terror in their eyes. The line to apply for development charters snaked across the plaza like a drunk caterpillar. Old Jack flashed the Wilson family crest at a guard captain and slipped him something heavy. The guard shouted for the crowd to make way for urgent noble business. People grumbled and cursed. Another rich kid cutting in line. But they moved. Raymond's cold stare silenced the loudest complainer, a burly mercenary who'd called me a pretty boy. Inside, the building was dark, cold, and smelled like ancient paperwork. The charter office was a cramped side room with a scratched-up oak desk. Behind it sat the most memorable bureaucrat I'd ever seen. A man in his 50s with hair like a gnawed field, a face like dried orange peel, cloudy eyes, and a spectacular red nose with a sweat drop dangling from its tip. His clerk's robe was faded and frayed at the cuffs. He scratched at documents with a nearly bald quill pen, moving like a rusty machine. When my turn came, I handed over the Wilson family's official documents. He squinted at the name, mumbled something about my father the Viscount, and slowly, painfully slowly, began filling in the registration ledger. Development area, he croaked. Northern province. Black Reef coast. He stopped writing, stared at me, then burst into wheezing, spit-spraying laughter. Black Reef coast. Another one. Another young noble who wants to die. He shook his greasy head, scrawling my destination in barely legible handwriting, then launched into a gleeful sermon about how Black Reef was nothing but black rocks and salt water, where crops died, wind blew you off cliffs, winter froze body parts that shouldn't freeze, and sea beasts dragged people into the deep. He'd worked this desk for 30 years, and fewer than 1 in 10 who took charters for that coast ever came back alive. The waiting room filled with snickers and whispers behind me. He's insane. Bet he won't last 3 months. I give him 1 winter. I could feel Raymond coiled like a spring and Jack's fury burning behind me. But I kept my face completely blank, letting the old man talk himself breathless. When he finally paused to gasp for air, I said calmly, "Thank you for the warning. My decision stands. Please issue the charter." His mocking grin froze, then twisted into irritation. He snorted, yanked a rough yellowed scroll from under the desk, found his stamp. A metal seal carved with a roaring bear, slammed it into the ink pad, and smashed it onto the parchment so hard I thought it would tear through. Doin' Wilson. Development territory. Black Reef coast. He practically spat the words, then flung the still wet scroll at me like garbage. Your death warrant. Don't lose it. The sea beasts won't care. I caught it. The parchment was rough as sandpaper, the crimson bearhead stamp still glistening with fresh ink. It smelled like cheap dye and cheaper bureaucracy. I didn't look at the clerk, didn't acknowledge the snickering crowd. I rolled the scroll carefully and tucked it into my innermost pocket, patting it gently. Raymond and Jack flanked me like war gods as we walked out. Their stares swept the room, and the whispers died instantly. Outside in the sunlight, I stood on the steps watching the plaza full of hopeful settlers fighting over slightly better patches of dirt. I touched the cold, rough scroll against my chest. Death warrant, I murmured, quiet enough for only my 2 guards to hear. For them, maybe. For me, I looked north, past the city walls, toward a distant coast of black rocks and barren shore that nobody wanted. That's prime real estate. Days after leaving the provincial capital, the temperature dropped off a cliff. I wrapped myself in my windproof cloak and still felt cold drilling into my bones. Then the lookout screamed from the crow's nest, wailing straight ahead. Every experienced sailor on deck went pale. I climbed to the bow and saw it. 2 massive black-brown cliffs facing each other like gates to hell, with a narrow channel between them. The sky above turned a sickening lead gray, pressing down on the water like a dirty ceiling. Even from a distance, the dread was physical. We had no choice but to go through. The moment we crossed into the strait, everything changed. The calm sea vanished. In its place was a boiling dark green nightmare. The wind didn't howl. It screamed, like thousands of tortured voices shrieking at once. I could barely stand. The clouds dropped so low they nearly touched our tallest mast, with pale lightning slithering silently through their depths. Then came the waves. Not waves. Moving mountains of black-green water, crashing from every direction. The first one hit the bedrock broadside like a battering ram. The entire ship groaned as if it would split apart. Everything unsecured, barrels, ropes, buckets, went sliding across the deck. I bear-hugged the main mast and held on for my life, feeling like a rag doll in a washing machine. Below deck, the farmers were in total misery. The violent rocking had them vomiting uncontrollably, their sick mixing with bilge water into a smell that could make a corpse gag. The Black Eagle and South Wind were barely visible between wave crests, bobbing like leaves about to be swallowed. Captain Barton screamed himself hoarse, steering us around whirlpools and rogue currents. Every wave impact felt like death's scythe scraping our hull. Wood creaked, ropes hummed at breaking point. Then the real disaster hit. A massive rogue wave, bigger and more violent than anything before, slammed into the south wind's stern from behind. Sea water buried half the rear deck instantly. Then came the sound that stopped my heart, a sharp, sickening crack. The reinforced oak cargo hold door, iron-banded, thick as a man's arm, had its hinges ripped clean off by the wave's force. The door flew open and the ocean poured in like a hungry beast. Inside that hold, nearest to the broken door, sat over a dozen carefully wrapped wooden crates containing my space-optimized grain seeds. These weren't ordinary seeds. They carried enhanced life energy from the space farm, designed to grow fast in poor soil. They were my guarantee of feeding 1,000 people through the crucial first months at Black Reef. The flooding waters smashed into those crates. Ropes snapped. Wood splintered. Golden seeds, plump, glowing faintly with life force, spilled out like sand and were swept through the broken door into the raging ocean. A golden stream of hope pouring into black-green chaos. The seeds, our seeds, an old farmer who'd been assigned to guard them collapsed against the railing, reaching uselessly toward the water, tears mixing with rain and spray on his weathered face. Below deck, the farming families heard the news, and their wailing cut through even the storm's roar, raw, terrified grief for a future that had just washed away. I stood on the bedrock's pitching bow and watched it all happen across the churning waves. The south wind's hold gaping open, golden grain disappearing into the sea, desperate screams carrying on the wind. I slammed my fist into the wet, freezing mast so hard my knuckles split. The storm didn't care about my plans. The North was teaching me its first lesson before I'd even arrived. Out here, nature's slap will always be louder than your ambitions. The storm finally loosened its grip. The screaming wind faded to a moan, and the monstrous waves shrank to merely terrifying ones. Pale light leaked through cracks in the gray clouds. Our 3 ships limped forward like beaten animals. The bedrock had a smashed railing. The Black Eagle lost a sail to shreds, and the south wind still had that gaping hole in its cargo hold, where my precious seeds had washed away. I was leaning against the main mast, soaked and pale, stomach still churning, cursing our luck, when the lookout's warning horn ripped through the air, short, sharp, panicked. Pirates. 3 sides. We're surrounded. I scrambled to the railing. From behind jagged rocks on our left, 2 small fast ships slid out like ghosts. Black hulls, patched and rotting, each flying a black flag with a dripping red cutlass. A 3rd ship emerged from the right rear. They'd been hiding in the reef zone, waiting for storm-battered prey exactly like us. Just our luck, survive Hell's own storm only to get ambushed while we were at our weakest. Captain Barton roared for battle stations. Exhausted sailors grabbed harpoons and axes. Seasick guards fumbled for their weapons with shaking hands. The farmers huddled in terror below deck. But my knights didn't flinch. Raymond's voice thundered across the deck. Knight Corps. Formation. 30 knights snapped into a tight circle behind him and Jack, moving as one unit. Then came the command. Blackstone Rampart. Immovable as mountains, a deep hum vibrated through the deck. Yellow earth element combat aura rose from all 30 knights simultaneously, merging into a single translucent shield, a dome of stone-textured golden energy covering the bedrock's central deck. The rampart formation, exactly as designed. The pirate ships slammed alongside us. Grappling hooks flew. Screaming raiders poured over the rails, filthy, scarred, waving rusted weapons, howling for blood, women, and gold. Their leader came first, a nearly 7-foot bald giant with one eye and a massive double-bladed battle axe. He charged straight at the knight formation, laughing. Raymond stepped out of the shield, gripped his heavy steel greatsword with both hands, channeled every ounce of combat aura into the blade, and brought it down in a single devastating overhead strike. The clash was deafening. Sparks exploded. The pirate chief's axe flew from his shattered grip. The giant himself was launched backward like a rag doll, crashing through 3 of his own men, blood spraying from his mouth. Dead before he stopped rolling. One strike. The pirate leader was gone. The raiders' charge faltered instantly. Fear replaced their bloodlust as they stared at Raymond standing in front of that glowing golden barrier. Jack seized the moment, his spear punching through a stunned pirate's throat. The knights surged forward under the shield's protection, cutting down raiders in a disciplined storm of steel. Then everything got worse. A shrill, inhuman shriek cut through the battle from the largest pirate ship's mast top. I spun around, and my blood went cold. Perched in the crow's nest was a small, skeletal figure wrapped in a filthy feathered robe, wearing a crown of black crow feathers and animal skulls. His face was painted white and green, with poisonous green light burning in his eyes. He held a bone staff topped with a cloudy green gem. An orc shaman. On a pirate ship. The North's worst nightmare had come early. His lips moved rapidly, chanting something foul. The green gem blazed, and 3 finger-thin beams of sickly green light, radiating pure death and decay, shot straight at my knight's formation. I didn't think. My fire magic ignited instantly. I shaped a dense, fist-sized fireball between my palms and launched it at the incoming beams. 2 of the 3 poison rays collided with my fireball in a muffled explosion. No dramatic blast, just a sick hissing sound as orange flame and green poison consumed each other, erupting into a cloud of foul dark green toxic fog that reeked of sulfur and rot. But the 3rd beam got through. It struck the deck near the shield's edge, and scattered poison mist touched several unprotected guards. The screaming was horrible. Where the green vapor touched bare skin, flesh blackened, blistered, and rotted in seconds. Guards collapsed, writhing in agony. The deck wood where the beam hit turned black and crumbled like ash. "Leah? Now!" I screamed while charging up another fireball. Leah went white, but didn't freeze. She shrieked at her nature apprentices to grab the emergency healing salves. They scrambled to the fallen guards, pried open their mouths, and forced in globs of my premium ruby-red healing paste. They smeared it thick over the corroding wounds. It worked. The agonizing pain visibly eased. The spreading rot slowed, then stopped. Blackened skin stabilized, seeping clear fluid as the salve's life energy formed an invisible barrier against the poison. The guards weren't healed, but they weren't dying anymore. Everyone who saw it, knights, sailors, terrified farmers peeking from below, felt a surge of hope. The boss's medicine was real. Raymond roared for a counterattack. The knights, their morale exploding, charged out of formation and tore into the remaining pirates with savage efficiency. Swords flashed, spears thrust, and pirate screams replaced their earlier war cries. The shaman on the mast watched his poison get neutralized and his pirates get slaughtered. His toxic green eyes locked onto me with cold, venomous hatred as I stood at the bow preparing a second fireball. I could feel him memorizing my face. Then he hissed something, slammed his staff downward, and vanished in a burst of dark green smoke. Only a few black crow feathers drifted down from the empty crow's nest. A bone whistle shrieked from the pirate flagship. The surviving raiders abandoned their dead and wounded, leaping back to their ships, cutting grappling lines, and fleeing in complete disorder. It was over. The deck was a mess of blood, seawater, and debris. The poison guards were stable thanks to the salve, but still in pain. Sailors began dragging pirate corpses to the rails. I stood at the bow watching the pirates disappear, then glanced up at the empty mast where the shaman had been. Storm damage, lost seeds, pirate ambush, and now an orc shaman who'd seen my face and escaped. I touched the development charter in my jacket. That red bearhead stamp seemed to be laughing at me. Black Reef Coast's welcome party was certainly memorable. After surviving the storm and pirate attack, our 3 battered ships finally crawled out of Whaling Strait. The crews were exhausted. Dried blood and wreckage covered the decks. The farmers huddled below in misery, seeds lost, blood spilled, death still fresh in everyone's minds. The sea calmed, but the air got worse. A thick, foul smell hit us, salt, rotting seaweed, and something mineral and alkaline that burned the nostrils. Old One-Eyed Edgar the Navigator called it sea dragon ambergris. I said it smelled more like a dragon with diarrhea. Then the fog parted, and I saw our new home for the first time. Black. Everything was black. The coastline wasn't sand. It was an endless wall of jagged black rock jutting from the water like monster teeth. Dark, sharp, stacked and twisted in every direction, stretching as far as I could see. Between the rocks, narrow strips of gray-brown gravel mixed with shell fragments and dark pebbles, the kind of beach that would destroy your feet. Behind the shore, the land was worse. Flat, cracked, gray-white earth covered in alkaline crust, hard as concrete. A few pathetic gray-green bushes shivered in the freezing wind, looking half dead. No trees, no grass, no green, no life. Even bird droppings were scarce. The smell at ground level was overwhelming. Concentrated salt, alkali, and decay pressed directly into your face. Old Jack stared and said it looked more desolate than the worst battlefield ruins he'd ever seen. Raymond managed only. This place is ugly as hell. Leah clutched her surviving hemostasis grass seedling and trembled. Bard started worrying whether his earth magic would even work on these rocks. We sailed along the coast until Captain Barton found a small natural bay, relatively calm water, fewer underwater rocks, a wide gravel beach, and most importantly, a massive vertical black cliff wall rising dozens of meters behind a gently sloping piece of land. That cliff was our answer, a natural fortress wall at our backs with high ground for lookout posts and a clear view of the entire bay. I ordered the landing boats out. When my boots hit the shore, the ground was hard, slippery, and sharp enough to hurt through leather. The alkaline air was so strong I coughed immediately. I scrambled up the slope and started assessing. The cliff provided shelter from behind. Enemies could only approach from the front. We could carve watch posts into it, maybe even tunnels later. I spotted some low pools near the rocks where seawater collected and guessed there might be freshwater springs underneath. I ordered a dig for the next day. Without fresh water, nothing else mattered. Jack and Raymond agreed this was the best spot available. High ground, natural defense, ocean visibility, potential water source. On this wasteland, it was the one halfway decent patch. Then the real trouble started. The landing boats began ferrying farmers ashore. When they stepped onto the gravel and saw what surrounded them, nothing but black rocks, dead soil, and freezing wind, the dam broke. An old farmer knelt down, scooped up a handful of the gray-white dirt, crumbled it between his fingers, smelled it, and started sobbing. He'd spent his whole life working rich black soil in the south. This wasn't soil. This was concrete mixed with salt. "We've been tricked," he wailed. "Nothing can grow here. We'll starve." That triggered a chain reaction. Children screamed for home. Women wept holding their babies. Men stared at the barren ground with hollow eyes. The craftsmen looked just as lost. They weren't afraid of hard work, but what good were their skills if there was nothing to build with and no food to eat? Panic and despair spread across the beach like poison gas. The gray sky pressed down on everyone's spirits even harder than the freezing wind. I stood on the slope above them all, watching the chaos, hearing the crying carried on the wind. My face showed nothing. I turned around and stomped the frozen ground hard. Sharp gravel bit through my boot sole. Dead alkaline dust puffed up around my feet. "What a treasure," I muttered through gritted teeth. But my jaw was set like iron. If I couldn't turn this wasteland into something, I'd write my name backward. I spun around and shouted down at Bard, who was nervously peeking at the crowd from behind a rock. "Bard, grab your team. Get up that slope and map every inch of this ground. I'm building the toughest shelter this coast has ever seen. Right against that cliff. Starting today, this godforsaken place that even salt-resistant weeds didn't want to live on was mine to conquer." The freezing north wind cut across the bare gravel beach like knives. Our farmers huddled in leaky grass shelters around pitiful campfires, staring at nothing. Despair was winning, salt-crusted ground, black rocks, lost seeds, biting cold. If I didn't act fast, I'd lose their hearts completely. I called Bard, Ella, and their 9 earth magic apprentices to the slope. They looked at the iron-hard black rock and frozen alkaline soil, and their faces said, "Impossible." Bard stammered that the stone was too hard for their weak magic. I grinned and pulled out 2 crumpled scrolls I'd copied from the Academy library, low-level earth spells called Stone to Mud and Mud to Stone. With these, every rock and patch of dead soil on this coast became building material. Like clay in our hands. The plan was simple. Give people homes first. Warm, solid shelter would steady their hearts. Everything else could wait. I mapped out a housing zone on the sheltered slope below the cliff wall, away from the wind. Bard's team of 5 would use stone to mud, softening massive Black Reef rocks into workable slurry. Ella's team of 5 would use mud to stone, converting useless alkaline dirt into solid building bricks. They'd work in shifts to recover their magic. Craftsmen would guide the farmers in using wooden molds to shape the slurry and stack the bricks. Old people and women would gather dry grass to fill gaps and insulate. Bard's group went first. 5 pairs of hands pressed against a boulder, spiritual power flowing through the spell patterns. Within minutes, a massive black rock melted into a steaming pile of thick brown mud. Bard's face lit up like a lantern. Ella's group performed the reverse miracle. She waved her hand over a patch of gray alkaline crust. The dead soil softened, then instantly re-hardened into a neat rectangular stone brick, rough but solid. An old farmer who'd been crying over the worthless soil just days ago watched a piece of that same soil transform into a building block. He fell to his knees, tears streaming, calling it a miracle. The construction site exploded with energy. Farmers who'd been paralyzed with hopelessness were suddenly running with wheelbarrows full of mud slurry, hauling stone bricks, shouting to each other. Craftsmen directed the work. Foundations poured from liquefied rock, walls stacked from converted bricks, roofs framed with timber and covered with oilcloth and packed earth. Simple, ugly, but warm and solid. I kept strict control of the mage's energy, 2-hour shifts, mandatory meditation breaks, diluted energy potions to help recovery. As they practiced, they got faster. The farmers found their rhythm too. 7 days. That's all it took. By the 7th sunset, rows of squat stone houses lined the sheltered slope. They were rough and ugly, crude walls, basic roofs, wooden plank doors. But they were real shelter that blocked the wind and held warmth. I announced the housing lottery. Every family got 1 room. Craftsmen and families with elderly or children went first. The rest would squeeze together until we built more. When the first families walked into their new stone houses, dry, warm, out of the wind, many broke down crying again. But this time it was joy. Children ran around the new buildings laughing. Women carefully arranged their few belongings. Men started patching cracks and reinforcing doors without being asked. Thin smoke rose from newly built chimneys. The despair that had nearly drowned us was gone, replaced by something fragile but real: hope. Bard and Ella sat collapsed on a rock, pale and trembling from exhaustion, but smiling at each other like they'd just conquered the world. I walked over and clapped their shoulders. You two are heroes of Black Reef Coast. Take 2 days off. Then we're building a stone fortress. I looked out at the wasteland beyond our little village. Still barren, still hostile, still ugly. But now I had people who believed. And that changed everything. The stone houses were up and the farmers finally had warm shelter, but a new crisis was already breathing down our necks. Food was running out. Storm damage and pirate losses had gutted our supplies. What remained would last maybe days, not weeks. I had mountains of space-grown radishes and wheat stored in my farm dimension, but pulling food from thin air in front of everyone was too risky. I needed to grow crops on this actual land first, then quietly supplement from the space if things got desperate. I gathered all my mages and a crowd of drafted farmers, and marched them to the flat ground behind the cliff wall, our best spot, sheltered from wind with decent sunlight. The farmers carried their hoes and rakes with dead eyes. They'd seen this soil. They knew it was concrete-hard alkaline crust that couldn't grow a weed. They thought I'd lost my mind. First step, break the ground. I ordered Bard, Ella, and the earth mages to use their stone to mud spell on the frozen salt crust. They pressed their palms to the iron-hard surface, channeled their power, and watched the gray-white ground melt into soft, dark, workable soil. What would have taken farmers weeks with hand tools took the mage teams hours. They worked in shifts, chugging diluted energy potions between rotations, softening strip after strip until we had a large field of deep, loose earth. Then came the secret weapon. I brought out barrels of concentrated space fertilizer, my golden miracle grow, diluted in seawater and stirred into a mild, earthy-smelling solution. Farmers poured it over every inch of turned soil, while the earth mages worked it deep with their magic. The transformation was instant and visible. The dull brown dirt turned rich, oily black. The texture changed from dead grit to soft, breathing earth. That awful alkaline smell vanished, replaced by the clean scent of living soil. An old farmer scooped up a handful and wept. He'd been crying over this same worthless dirt days ago, and now it looked better than the best farmland back south. We planted wheat, radish, and cabbage seeds from my supplies, ordinary looking but space-enhanced for faster growth. Leah and the nature mages knelt along the field edges, pressing their hands to the soil, channeling whatever feeble growth magic they could manage. The actual effect was minimal, but I wanted the show. Farmers needed to see magic blessing their crops. Faith mattered as much as fertilizer right now. Then came the waiting. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, bare dirt. Day 3, maybe the surface shifted slightly? Everyone was wound tight with anxiety. Day 4, before dawn, a night watchman came tumbling into the village screaming, "Green! It's sprouting!" The entire settlement stampeded to the fields. And there they were, hundreds of tiny green shoots pushing through the dark soil. Wheat seedlings, thin but bright green, growing at least twice normal speed. Radish sprouts with fat round leaves. Cabbage shoots fuzzy and vigorous. All trembling in the cold wind but stubbornly reaching upward, drinking in weak sunlight and the fertilizer's energy. The contrast against the surrounding black wasteland was almost painful, a rectangle of vivid green life in an ocean of gray death. The farmers completely broke down. Old men fell to their knees sobbing, gently touching the seedlings with shaking hands. Women hugged each other crying with joy. Children crouched at the edges, wanting to touch the sprouts but afraid to damage them. People started shouting that I was chosen by the gods, that this was divine blessing. Leah and the nature mages stood at the field's edge beaming, faces red with pride. They knew the fertilizer did most of the work, but they'd been part of this miracle, and that feeling of belonging, of being needed, lit them up from inside. I stood on the field ridge watching the whole scene. 500 families who'd been ready to give up, now kneeling in black soil, weeping over green sprouts. The weight on my chest finally eased. I picked up a pinch of that rich, dark, living earth, looked at the bright seedlings, and allowed myself a real smile. Earth mages to break the ground. Magical fertilizer to transform it. Nature mages to nurture it. The combination worked perfectly. The farming operation was officially alive. I looked out at the vast, still barren coastline stretching in every direction and felt my ambition burning hotter than ever. The first crops were in. Now it was just a matter of how fast they'd grow. With the crops sprouting and the food crisis on pause, I turned to the next problem, protein. My knights couldn't swing swords on a diet of radishes and cabbage. We needed meat. I looked at the dozens of steel-toothed rabbit cubs in their reinforced cages on the bedrock and saw a gold mine. Rabbits breed fast, eat cheap, produce tasty meat, useful fur, and, most importantly, magic cores. Mobile treasure chests. I called in Bard, Ella, and the Earth Mage team for yet another construction job. They groaned. Bard slapped his forehead and complained that he was supposed to be a noble mage, not a full-time bricklayer. But they got to work, using their stone to mud and mud to stone spells on the scattered Black Reef rocks. They churned out uniform dark stone bricks. Masons stacked them, mages reinforced the joints, and within 2 days we had a massive circular enclosure, walls over 2.5 meters high, topped with sharp stone spikes to prevent escapes. It looked more like a small fortress than an animal pen. I named it Black Reef No. 1 Magical Beast Ranch, or as everyone called it, the Rabbit Pen. Old Hank, the farmer I put in charge, immediately asked the obvious question, what do we feed them? We barely had enough food for ourselves, and nobody was wasting grain on rabbits. I pointed at the ocean. Seaweed. Haul it in, dry it, grind it up, mix it with leftover wheat bran and water. Hank looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Rabbits eat seaweed. They do now. The resulting feed was a foul-smelling dark green paste that made Hank gag just looking at it. But when we opened the cages, the hungry rabbits dove in and ate every last drop. Their oversized front teeth worked like tiny shovels, scraping the stone troughs clean. What nobody knew was that every night, after everyone was asleep, I snuck into the pen and sprinkled a thin layer of space-grown premium beast feed at the bottom of the troughs. Mixed under the seaweed paste, invisible to anyone checking in the morning. The rabbits licked their bowls clean and woke up shinier and more energetic each day. Hank scratched his head wondering why they were thriving on his terrible cooking. A few days later, Hank came running to me in a panic. Strange sounds were coming from the pen, metallic clinking and grinding. He thought the rabbits were fighting. They weren't fighting. They were eating rocks. Dozens of rabbits had gathered around scattered chunks of Black Reef stone at the base of the walls and were gnawing on them with those terrifying front teeth. Sparks flew. Stone chips scattered. They chomped through solid rock like it was crackers, clearly enjoying every bite. Hank nearly fainted. I just laughed. Steel-toothed rabbits naturally chew minerals. It's in their nature as earth element magical beasts. The space feed had probably amplified the instinct, and these Black Reef rocks likely contained minerals they craved. I told Hank to stop cleaning the loose stones from the pen. Free snacks and natural tooth sharpeners. I also ordered the farmers to start scraping the black, slimy moss off the coastal rocks and adding it to the feed mix. When Hank dumped the first basket of moss into the pen, the rabbits swarmed it even more eagerly than the seaweed paste. The farmers watched in amazement. Rabbits eating seaweed, gnawing rocks, munching moss, and getting fatter and healthier by the day. Word spread through the settlement. People started looking at the rabbit pen with a strange new respect. If creatures could thrive on seaweed and stone in this wasteland, maybe, just maybe, the rest of us could too. I stood with my hands behind my back, watching my glossy, rock-chomping rabbits, then glanced at the green fields in the distance. Meat source, established. Magic core factory, operational. Morale booster, delivered. Black Reef Coast was starting to work. A month after our nightmarish first landing, two familiar shapes appeared on the gray horizon, the Black Eagle and the South Wind, sails bulging with the Wilson family crest. The lookout nearly fell off his tower screaming the news. The whole settlement erupted. Farmers dropped their tools and ran to the beach. Night straightened up. Even the rabbits paused their rock chewing. I hurried to the landing zone with Raymond and Jack, watching the two ships ride low in the water, much heavier than last time. Edmund had come through big. But my stomach sank too, because I knew what was coming. Another round of the hellish unloading process on this miserable gravel beach. Old One-Eyed Edgar and I circled the anchored ships in a rowboat, checking for hidden underwater rocks and tricky currents. The path we'd stomped out last time had been erased by the tides. Every trip to this coast reminded me how badly we needed a real dock. The cargo was serious this time. Thick lumber planks, crates of iron nails and fittings, pulleys, heavy rope, waterproof canvas, improved iron plowheads, steel tools, and even barrels of waterproofing oil. Everything we needed to start building real infrastructure. But the unloading was just as brutal as before. Cargo swung on ropes from ship decks into bobbing rowboats. Sailors jumped into freezing water to push loaded boats onto the gravel. Farmers hauled heavy crates across slippery, ankle-twisting stones. A bundle of good lumber slid off and half of it got swept away by waves. A barrel of sealing oil tipped over in a rowboat, coating everything nearby in sticky stink. A bag of seed grain fell into seawater when a farmer tripped. We rescued it fast, but the damage was done. I watched from the high ground, grinding my teeth at every loss. Old Grim the master carpenter marched up to me and said what I was already thinking. We couldn't keep doing this. Even a simple wooden pier extending into deeper water would save enormous effort and waste. I pointed at the lumber piling up on shore and told him that building a dock was his first job once unloading finished. A welcome surprise came off the south wind. Several dozen new settlers recruited from around Blackstone City, sent by Edmund. Men, women, families, all nervous but curious. When they stepped onto the gravel and saw our stone village, the busy unloading operation, and especially the green test fields in the distance, their anxiety started melting into cautious hope. An old newcomer pointed at the crops and asked a veteran settler if wheat really grew here. The veteran puffed out his chest proudly and explained about the special fertilizer turning salt flats into farmland, the fast-growing crops, the magic. The newcomer's eyes widened. Maybe this place wasn't a death sentence after all. 2 grueling days of unloading later, the beach was piled high with supplies. Everyone was exhausted to the bone, but spirits were high. New tools, new lumber, new people, new possibilities. I climbed aboard the South Wind before it left and handed the captain a sealed letter for my father and brother. I told him to report that Black Reef Coast was standing. Houses built. Crops growing. Rabbits fattening. Send wine next time. The 2 ships raised anchor and sailed away, carrying my letter and the news that we'd survived. Only the battered bedrock remained in the bay, our faithful guardian. I stood on the cold gravel watching the ships shrink into the distance, then turned to look at the mountains of fresh supplies, the busy settlers, and the green fields beyond. "Doc," I muttered, "you're first on the list. Once I build a proper harbor, supplies will flow in like a river. Black Reef Port, it's happening." The freezing weather was destroying my people. Coughs echoed through the stone village like a chorus. Farmers got frostbite and cracked skin from working in the wind. Knights collected bruises and sprains from training. My earth mages were pale as ghosts from draining their magic on construction. The nature mages were just as spent from tending the crops. Everyone needed medicine, and I had almost nothing left. My premium healing salves were nearly gone after the storm and pirate fight. I needed a working alchemy workshop. Here, on this godforsaken coast, with whatever we had. I found a small room in the corner of the stone fort's second floor, tucked against the cliff wall. It was drafty, ugly, and far enough from everything that an explosion wouldn't matter much. Best of all, the cliff had a natural crack, a ready-made ventilation hole. The setup was pathetic. One battered clay cauldron. No magical heating array, just a pile of half-wet seaweed and shrub roots for fuel. Leah looked at it all and asked if we really needed pure magical flame for proper alchemy. I told her we were past worrying about purity, we needed to survive. The smoke problem was immediate and horrible. I lit a test fire, and the room filled with choking black clouds. Carl was crying and coughing within seconds. Then I looked at my 3 wind element apprentices, new arrivals who'd been standing around uselessly, and had a brilliant idea. I pointed them at the ventilation crack and told them to blow. "Be the exhaust fan," I said. They stared at me in disbelief. They were supposed to be mages, not human bellows. But my expression made the alternative clear: blow or don't eat. They lined up and started channeling wind magic at the crack, rotating shifts. It worked, barely. The smoke moved toward the exit instead of filling the room. The 3 of them were gasping like dogs within minutes, but at least we could breathe. For ingredients, I scraped together what I could. Hemostasis grass grew wild in the rock crevices here. Tough, thick-leafed, smelling of sea salt and bitterness. I had farmers carefully harvest and dry bundles of it. Concentration flowers didn't grow here at all, so I secretly smuggled a few seedlings from my space farm and gave them to Leah to cultivate in a sheltered patch behind the fort, fed with diluted magical fertilizer. Supply was limited. For everything else, I used whatever Black Reef offered: seawater, crushed oyster shell powder, even stone dust scraped from rocks the rabbits had chewed. My rule was simple: use local materials first, cheat from the space farm when absolutely necessary. I put Leah in charge as head pharmacist. She was terrified but determined. Following recipes I'd simplified through my wisdom workshop, she directed 2 apprentice assistants through the first batch. The fire lit. Smoke billowed. The wind mages blew frantically. Dried hemostasis grass went into the warming cauldron, sizzling and releasing bitter herbal fumes that mixed with the ever-present smoke stink. Leah called out every step: stir clockwise, add 1 ladle of seawater, a pinch of oyster powder, a fingernail of stone dust. The mixture thickened, darkened from green to deep reddish black, smelling like medicine, ocean, minerals, and campfire all blended together. When Leah called for the fire to stop, the assistants hauled the scalding cauldron off with wet rags. A burly farmer pounded the hot paste in a stone mortar until it turned smooth and dark red. I tested it on a small cut on my own hand. Cool relief spread instantly, pain faded, bleeding stopped fast. Not as powerful as my space-grade premium stuff, but far better than anything you'd buy at a regular market. And most importantly, Leah made it, not me. I didn't have to do everything alone anymore. The second batch was concentration flower tea, a mild energy potion. Leah used her precious dried petals sparingly, simmering them gently with diluted fertilizer solution and a touch of seawater. The result was a faintly glowing pale blue liquid with a clean, cool floral scent that actually overpowered the room's smokiness. Carl volunteered to test it. 1 sip and his drooping, exhausted eyes snapped clear. He shouted that his head felt genuinely better. Not as intense as my personal potions, but real and effective. The smoky little room erupted in cheers. We'd done it. Brewed actual working medicine on this barren coast with seaweed fuel, a clay pot, and human-powered ventilation. I officially declared the Black Reef Coast Potion Workshop open for business. Leah ran production. Carl managed ingredient cultivation. The 3-wind mages became permanent exhaust fans. Everyone else assisted. Thin smoke curled from the cliff crack, carrying a strange perfume of herbs, sea salt, and wood fire across the settlement. It smelled like survival. The cold wind still cut like knives, but nobody cared anymore. Every pair of eyes in the settlement was glued to the fields behind the fort, those strips of former salt flat that our magical fertilizer had transformed into real farmland. The wheat was golden and heavy-headed, bending in the wind. Radish greens carpeted the ground thick as a rug. Cabbage leaves wrapped tight and fat around their hearts. The smell of growing crops had actually overpowered the usual salt and alkali stink of Black Reef coast. That sweet grain scent was driving everyone crazy with anticipation. I walked the field edges, pinching wheat stalks and testing cabbage leaves. The grain wasn't as plump as southern harvests, but it was solid and real. The vegetables were crisp and juicy. Good enough. Tomorrow, we harvest. Those 2 words spread through the village like wildfire. Farmers grabbed their sharpened sickles and baskets. Old people hobbled out with walking sticks. Mothers carried babies. Even toddlers stumbled along behind. When I gave the signal, dozens of sickles swung down together. The sound of blades cutting through wheat stalks, that clean, crisp whisper, was the most beautiful music I'd heard since arriving on this coast. Golden sheaves fell and rose, releasing the sweet smell of fresh straw. Farmers moved with a joy that bordered on religious devotion. Harvesting wheat on Black Reef coast. A month ago, nobody would have believed it possible. On the vegetable side, workers carefully dug up white, round radishes and chopped plump cabbages. Not as big as southern produce, but smooth, firm, and plentiful. People held up radishes with tears running down their weathered faces. They'd farmed their whole lives and knew exactly how miraculous this was. Kids chased each other along the field edges, sneaking bites of raw cabbage leaves and grinning with full cheeks. The harvest took most of the day. When the last bundle was tied and the last basket lifted, everyone was exhausted but beaming. The wheat yield was less than half what good southern land would produce, and the kernels weren't perfectly fat, but they were golden and real. The radishes were smaller than ideal but numerous, crisp, and sweet. The cabbages were thick-leafed and tight-hearted, perfect for storing through winter. Limited? Sure. But for 1,000 people who'd arrived expecting to starve on barren rock, this was a mountain of gold. I announced a feast. We hauled out precious salt meat from the ship stores. Farm women fired up big iron pots, ground wheat into coarse flour, and boiled thick, fragrant porridge. Salt meat sizzled in hot oil, releasing an aroma that grabbed every stomach within 100 meters. Radish and cabbage chunks went in next, soaking up the fat. Everything got dumped into enormous pots of wheat porridge with salt, then simmered until it was thick, steaming, and impossibly delicious. People lined up with their chipped bowls and dented pots. Every person got a heaping ladle of the rich stew, chunks of meat, vegetables, and thick grain porridge, glistening with oil, piping hot. They crouched on field ridges and doorsteps, slurping and burning their tongues, not caring. The hot food spread warmth from their bellies outward, melting away months of cold and fear. Laughter echoed across the village for the first time. Children ate until their faces were smeared and their little bellies round. I sat on the ridge with Jack and Raymond, shoveling in a bowl of my own. I nudged the old farmer next to me, the same man who'd knelt crying over the worthless soil on our first day. Told you this land could grow food, I said. He couldn't answer with his mouth stuffed full, just nodded frantically with tears streaming. Then came the best surprise. Without anyone telling them to, farmers finished eating, wiped their mouths, grabbed their tools, and marched toward the untouched wasteland beyond our fields. They started claiming plots and breaking ground on their own, arguing over which patches looked most promising, shouting about next year's radish crops. Leah and the nature mages walked through the harvested fields with notebooks, measuring wheat heads and radish diameters, recording which sections did best, planning how to adjust the fertilizer ratios next time. I watched it all, the eager digging, the careful note-taking, the eyes that no longer held fear but burned with ambition, and felt the last heavy stone lift off my chest. I drained my bowl of porridge, feeling the warmth settle deep, and looked out at the still barren coastline stretching beyond our little green miracle. First harvest. Done. I said it quietly, tasting the words. With food, hearts are steady. With land, roots are deep. Thin cooking smoke drifted upward, carrying the smell of grain and meat across the freezing air. It wasn't the smoke of desperation anymore. It was the announcement of a new home being born. Black Reef Coast. I'd finally, truly, put down roots. With the harvest stored, the medicine workshop churning out healing salves and energy potions, and everyone eating properly for the first time, morale was finally climbing. Farmers hummed while scraping moss for the rabbits. It was time to upgrade our defenses. Our stone fort was barely more than a rough shell. Gaps in the walls you could stick your fingers through, weak corners, and patches that looked ready to crumble if someone sneezed on them. It might stop a stray dog, if any dogs existed out here. I called Bard, Ella, and the Earth Mage team. They'd just finished eating and were trying to recharge in a sunny corner. Their faces fell the moment they heard my voice. More bricklaying. The never-ending story. I walked them around the fort, pointing out every flaw. Thin spots got the order to add half a meter of thickness. Weak corners needed rounding and reinforcing. Sloppy patches got torn down for rebuilding. Bard's team would soften the old stone surfaces with stone to mud. Ella's team would apply fresh layers and harden them with mud to stone. The result was smooth, thick walls fused seamlessly to the original structure. No joints, no cracks. I renamed it Black Reef Fortress. Sounded properly intimidating. Next I had them dig underground. 3 meters down through solid black rock, cycling between softening stone and scooping out mud. The finished basement had smooth walls and floor, ventilation holes, and enough space to store grain, medicine, and anything valuable. Finally, real security for our supplies. We carved huge stone basins inside the fort too, connected to rooftop drainage channels. When it rained, water would flow down and collect in these tanks. Emergency water reserves, critical on a coast where fresh water was scarce. Up top, the flat roof got a ring of waist-high stone walls for protection and a lookout shelter built from timber and thick canvas. 3 sides blocked, one side open facing the sea. I had 2 heavy iron fire basins installed at the observation point, loaded with dried seaweed, brush roots, and whale oil. When lit, the flames were visible for miles. 1 fire meant a ship approaching. 2 fires meant enemy attack, pirates or orcs. Then came the part I'd been thinking about since we arrived, turning farmers into militia. I told Raymond and Jack to start training every able-bodied farmer in basic defense. Not turning them into warriors, just teaching them where to run when attacked, where to hide, how to support the knights from behind walls, how to thrust spears through gaps in the stonework, and how to throw rocks effectively. Raymond looked doubtful. Jack scratched his chin. The farmers were better with hoes than swords. But I didn't need heroes. I needed bodies who could follow orders and not panic. Training was rough. Farmers jabbed wooden poles at the air like drunk ducks. Rock-throwing practice nearly brained several bystanders, sending women and children screaming. The knights demonstrated defensive positions and counterattack patterns between fits of poorly hidden laughter. It was messy and clumsy, but after a few sessions, something started clicking. People learned which alarm meant what, where their assigned positions were, who to listen to, and how to work together behind the walls. A faint outline of organized defense emerged from the chaos. Standing on the reinforced walls that evening, I looked down at the training ground, then out at the thickened fortress walls, the underground vault, the water tanks, the blazing lookout fires, the green fields beyond, and the smoking chimneys of the village. For the first time, Black Reef Coast didn't just feel like a place we were surviving. It was starting to feel like something worth defending. Things were running smoothly on the surface, fort upgraded, crops growing, rabbits thriving, militia training. But I couldn't shake the memory of that orc shaman's poisonous green eyes from the pirate fight. Danger was out there, and sitting behind walls waiting to be surprised was a death wish. I upgraded the lookout post to round-the-clock operation. 3 shifts, 24 hours, fires burning constantly. I pulled old one-eyed Edgar aside and told him he was now my human radar. Any ship on the horizon, any strange movement on shore, ring the bell. Immediately, I trained a dozen sharp-eyed young farmers as his rotation crew, teaching them to identify different sail types, spot unusual currents, and recognize suspicious movement along the coast. But watching from the fort wasn't enough. I needed to know what was out there on our actual coastline. I organized patrol teams, 1 knight, 2 guards, and 2 trained farmers per squad. 5 people, light gear, daily routes along the shore. Their job: map the territory, find freshwater sources, locate useful resources, identify hiding spots and defensive positions. And most importantly, watch for signs of orcs. Raymond led the first patrol himself. They headed west along the rocky coast at dawn, picking their way across freezing gravel and slippery reef stone. The 2 farmer scouts turned out to be surprisingly useful. Months of scraping moss had taught them every crevice and tide pool for miles. They pointed out oyster beds, rainwater puddles, and animal tracks as they walked. Around midday, sheltering behind rocks for a rest, 1 farmer mentioned seeing large white bones nearby weeks ago. Raymond went to investigate immediately. What he found turned his blood cold. In a patch of sand near an open gravel beach, half buried by tidal wash, were enormous claw prints, bigger than a man's hand, deep and sharp-edged. Scattered around them were bleached, broken animal bones. Then, at the base of a massive black rock, Raymond found something worse: a crude bone spear. The shaft was roughly shaped bone, the tip a sharpened piece of black flint lashed on with animal sinew. Dried dark stains, old blood, still clung to the point. Carved into the rock beside it was a rough symbol: a snarling beast head with exposed fangs. An orc territorial marker. Raymond grabbed the spear, wrapped it in oilcloth, and ordered an immediate retreat. The patrol sprinted back to the fort in grim silence. The 2 farmers were white-faced and shaking. They'd grown up on stories of orcs eating people alive. The lookout bell clanged frantically as the patrol came running in. Everyone in the settlement froze. Knights gripped weapons. Farmers stopped mid-swing with their hoes. Raymond reached the watchtower and handed me the bone spear. It was heavy and cold, radiating a primitive menace. I unwrapped it and saw the beast head carving. The claw prints were days old at most, partially washed by tides, but still deeply pressed into the sand. Orcs had been right at our doorstep. Recently, I carried the spear to the edge of the watchtower where everyone below could see me. I held it up high. "See this?" I shouted into the wind. "Orc claws have reached Black Reef coast." Fear rippled through the crowd like a wave. But I didn't let it settle. "So what?" I roared. "Our fort is reinforced. Our cellars are stocked. Our weapons are sharp. Our knights are ready. And you?" I pointed the spear at the militia clutching their wooden poles and stones. "Your hands aren't holding firewood. They're holding your survival. When the orcs come, I'll be ready. I've been waiting for something to test our new blades on. Let's see whose bones are harder, theirs or our walls." I slammed the bone spear into the stone floor of the watchtower. The crack echoed across the settlement. Then I issued rapid orders. Patrol routes shortened, but coverage expanded, focusing west toward where the tracks were found. Lookout watch doubled in alertness. Knights, guards, and militia all moved to combat readiness. Weapons carried at all times, one eye open while sleeping. Fort gates reinforced and locked every night without exception. The fear in people's eyes didn't vanish, but it hardened into something more useful: the fierce determination of people with nowhere left to run. I looked at the crude bone spear in my hand and out toward the gray western coastline. "Come on then," I muttered. I needed a whetstone anyway. Carl and the nature mage apprentices were out scraping hemostasis grass and moss from the coastal rocks when he spotted something incredible: a herd of wild mountain goats, maybe 15 of them, leaping across the sheer cliff faces like the jagged black rocks were flat ground. These goats were compact and tough, covered in coarse gray-brown fur, with hard little hooves that gripped the razor-sharp reef stone perfectly. They were eating the thick-leaved, salt-resistant bushes growing in cliff cracks and the slimy dark moss clinging to the rocks, the same stuff we could barely choke down ourselves. Even better, Carl spotted a young kid stumbling on a slope, protected by its mother. Where there were babies, there was a breeding population. Carl remembered my lessons about natural affinity magic. He crept closer, hands open and unthreatening, and channeled gentle, warm spiritual energy toward the herd. The goats tensed up, lead males lowered their horns, but the hostility dimmed slightly. He laid out cabbage leaves and radish greens on a flat rock. The goats were interested but too suspicious to approach. Then Carl pulled out his secret weapon, a small space-grown radish from his emergency rations. The moment that radish hit the air, its concentrated life energy aroma spread like magic. The herd went crazy. The proud lead male broke first, charging over to grab food. The rest followed in a stampede, shoving each other to get at the leaves. They devoured every scrap, but their eyes stayed glued to that space radish. One big male snatched it whole, chewing blissfully while the others drooled. Carl sprinted back to report. I immediately ordered Bard and Ella to build a large stone enclosure. Black Reef Ranch number 2. Half a day of earth magic later, we had a goat pen several times bigger than the rabbit enclosure, solid and tall. Carl became our head animal tamer. His strategy was simple: bait and befriend. Day 1, he left ordinary vegetables far from the pen. Day 2, closer, with bits of space radish mixed in. Day 3, right at the pen entrance with full space radish chunks, and his calming magic at maximum. By the third afternoon, the greedy lead male couldn't resist anymore and walked right through the gate. The others followed one by one, drawn by the irresistible radish scent and Carl's soothing aura. "Shut the gate," Carl screamed. The farmers slammed it closed. The Black Reef mountain goats were officially domesticated. Feeding them was easy, same formula as the rabbits. Harvested seaweed and scraped rock moss, dried and piled in the pen. The goats ate it eagerly, just as they had in the wild. Carl visited daily with space radish treats to keep building trust. The goats quickly learned to mob him the moment he appeared, bleating like excited children. The little kid even nuzzled his leg for extra pieces. Then the best news: the mother goat's udder was swelling. Milk. Not much yet, but real goat milk. Nutritious food for our children, elderly, and injured. I stood looking at the goat pen, then at the rabbit enclosure, then at the green fields beyond. Rabbit meat, goat milk, radishes, cabbage, wheat porridge. Our diet was diversifying fast. The settlement's nutrition was climbing from desperate survival rations towards something that actually kept people healthy and strong. Black Reef Coast was becoming a real home, one animal pen at a time. I was standing by the goat pen watching Carl feed his beloved mountain goats, daydreaming about goat milk skincare products for noble ladies, when the alarm bell shattered everything. In the war room, Raymond laid out what his patrol had found. West of Crocodile Head Reef, hidden in a rock crevice, a pack of cobalts, dozens of them mining ore. He'd brought back samples, chewed rock fragments, crude bone spears, and most importantly, a chunk of dark metallic stone with a fresh-cut surface. Iron ore. My brain exploded in 2 directions simultaneously. Threat. Hostile creatures operating right on our doorstep, mining resources that could arm enemies. Opportunity. Our wasteland had iron deposits. Iron meant better tools, weapons, armor. It would rocket our development forward. The choice was obvious. Take it. All of it. I assembled the full strike force. 30 knights in polished armor, combat aura glowing, swords drawn. Militia with sharpened spears standing back up. Leah and the healers ready with potions. We marched fast and quiet across the reef stone toward Crocodile Head. The mine entrance was a narrow crack in the cliff face, barely wide enough for 2 people. Fresh stone chips and foul-smelling cobalt droppings littered the ground outside. From inside came the rhythmic clink of mining tools and harsh, barking voices. My plan was simple. I had Raymond's shield wall seal the entrance. Then I stepped back, gathered my fire magic, and launched 3 dense fireballs at the massive loose boulder hanging above the cave mouth. The explosion was spectacular. The boulder shattered, the surrounding rock collapsed, and the main entrance caved in completely. Dust and smoke billowed out through the remaining gap, while terrified screaming erupted from inside. Trapped. Jack led the charge through the rubble. He smashed through the debris like a human battering ram and plunged into the smoke-filled tunnel, knights pouring in behind him. Inside was chaos. Dozens of small, hunched, dust-covered kobold miners armed with nothing but bone picks and stone hammers. Against armored knights channeling earth element combat aura in a confined space, they didn't stand a chance. The fighting lasted maybe 3 minutes. Jack speared their leader through the throat, so hard the creatures had exploded. The knights swept through the rest like a scythe through weeds. When the dust settled, kobold bodies littered the tunnel floor. But in the corner, 20-odd surviving miners huddled together, shaking violently, tools abandoned, whimpering with their heads down. Zero fight left in them. I walked in, stepping over corpses, nose burning from blood, gunpowder, and the sharp animal stink of cobalts. Then I saw the walls. Exposed veins of dark, metallic or ran through the rock, scattered and not incredibly rich, but unmistakably iron. Real iron ore, right here on Black Reef coast. My heart hammered as I ran my fingers along the cold mineral surface. Then I looked at the cowering cobalt miners. Their claws were calloused from digging. Their teeth were worn from gnawing rock. These creatures were experienced miners. Ugly, smelly, but genuinely skilled at exactly the work I needed done. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sound echoed through the blood-soaked tunnel. I crouched in front of the trembling group and pulled out a piece of space radish peel. The sweet, life-rich scent cut through the gore and stench instantly. One brave kobold sniffed the air, its dull eyes flickering with unmistakable longing. I held the peel forward with my friendliest smile. Want some? Work for me. Dig my ore, and you'll get plenty. They looked at the radish peel. They looked at the blood-soaked knights behind me. They looked back at the peel. Every single one nodded frantically, making pitiful submissive sounds. Perfect. We marched them out in a rope line. 24 new miners for Black Reef Coast's first iron operation. I walked last, clutching the ore sample in my pocket, already calculating how many tools and weapons we could forge once production started. Iron, the one resource that could transform a struggling frontier settlement into a real power. And it had been sitting right under our noses, guarded by nothing more than a pack of kobolds with stone hammers. Sometimes this wasteland surprised me in the best possible way.